What fantasy race is obsessed with being the main character and thinks that all their daddy issues are much more nuanced than those lousy tieflings? If you guessed Aasimar, you are correct. Every Aasimar walks into a tavern thinking that they're too holy to be seen in such a place, but the reality is that they're here for the same job as the rest of the party. Remember, acting like you're overqualified for an escort mission is a surefire way to make sure the king never gives you all those missions that a chosen one is supposed to get. I get that Aasimars have divine blood flowing through their body, but it's still a mortal body, so you're gonna have to do some grunt work before you can afford all that cool angelic armor and achieve your goal of becoming the most annoying glow stick in the realm. I honestly think that Aasimars are harder to work with than elves, which is a quite impressive feat. You see, an elf will think they're better than you because of their natural talents and centuries of wisdom, but an Aasimar will think they're better than you because of a divine heritage that they treat like a trust fund. Throwing around the phrase, "Do you know who my father is?" to a bunch of adventurers who either grew up as orphans or also have magical ancestors doesn't really land the way an Aasimar would expect. You don't get it, my great-great-grandfather was an angel. Dude, all our great-great-grandfathers were otherworldly beings. Now help me hide the Baron's body. Aasimars act like they are the protagonists of the campaign because how can a descendant of a divine being not literally be the chosen one? The rest of the party must just be the supporting cast that's there to get beaten up by the villain, so when the Aasimar finally decides to take a swing and instantly kills the big bad evil guy, it seems like it was a hard-fought battle. At least tieflings cast themselves as tragic protagonists that still have to rise up and achieve greatness in spite of their flaws. It seems like every Aasimar sees themselves as a perfectly actualized individual even before the campaign begins, and each session is just another opportunity to applaud the greatness of said character. As a dungeon master, I understand that it can be a lot of fun to take someone's backstory and tie it into the campaign, because that can give each character a unique motivation within the campaign's world. But I'd hesitate to include anything resembling prophecy or even just a quick dream sequence chat with their angelic ancestor, because it doesn't matter if you plan that as a plot hook to be clarified at a later date. You cannot get between an Aasimar and their greatness. Their divine blood yearns for the approval of their celestial daddy, and honestly it's on you for letting them know that they can become a saint in this campaign. Every Aasimar backstory has the same abandonment issues baked into it that you'd expect from a tiefling's upbringing, but this time it has a fun celestial aesthetic. Sure, your father was an otherworldly being that abandoned you before you were born, but at least they were probably helping an order of paladins protect the realm from some evil demon incursion. Yeah, that's totally the reason they never seem to answer your prayers. They are out there protecting every innocent child in the realm from wickedness besides their own blood, and that totally didn't give you any trauma growing up at all. Sure, you're way more emotionally stable than those silly tieflings because your absentee father is a much better dude. I feel like many Aasimars feel obligated to become a cleric or paladin simply because they view it as a class they were born to play. But the reality is that an Aasimar is able to naturally excel in most things because of their celestial powers. Just don't be surprised when your family is disappointed that you gave up a high-ranking position at the local cathedral to become a bard. That is basically the equivalent of telling your dad that you won't become a partner at their esteemed law firm because you decided that now is a great time to get a liberal arts degree and become a perpetually unemployed musician. Just because Aasimars are descendants of beings of holy light doesn't mean they can't have their own fallen angel phase. I've seen my fair share of people named Aurelio Lightbringer, Herald of Hope, go to the dark side and become Aurelio Nightbringer, Deacon of Despair. Even if you don't commit to the dark side forever, there is something fun about being an edgy Aasimar whose holy blood boils as you commit various atrocities. It's like you know that it isn't good for you and your divine family wouldn't approve, and that makes your act of rebellion that much more fun. I'm not saying every Aasimar chooses to start shopping at Hot Topic for an all-new black wardrobe and starts dyeing their hair black too. I'm just saying that if an Aasimar is starting to get stressed about the whole destined for greatness thing, they can try brooding in the corner of a tavern and see if that's something that appeals to them more. I think ultimately most Aasimars will realize that being a creature of darkness doesn't exactly work when your skin can literally glow, but I'm not going to be the one that forces them to take over the family business of purging the land of evil. Sometimes an Aasimar will have a celestial guide that's supposed to make the Holy Family business onboarding process a little easier. These guides present themselves as individuals that can give an aimless Aasimar purpose, but I honestly feel like they're there to keep them on a continuous performance improvement plan so that they can maximize their output without offering any real meaningful connection between the Aasimar and their deity. If I was constantly being micromanaged by a celestial deity that isn't really even the angel that I get my celestial blood from, I'd be a bit annoying to adventure with too. Like, this guide will come to you acting like they're your friend, here to help you complete your holy mission. But the moment you commit a sin or two to bond with your adventuring party, they demand that you atone for your crimes immediately, or else you are cut off. I guess Aasimars have to do the dirty work of the gods without actually getting their hands dirty. I wouldn't expect a celestial guide that has never had to do the job themselves to understand that things aren't black and white here in the material plane. People assume that Aasimars are nice because they are good, but you have to remember that many Aasimars are just a paladin at heart, even if that isn't the class it says on their character sheet. That means that you may encounter one that thinks minor crimes like littering are punishable by death. While I know that most Aasimars have empathy, you have to be careful to not make them think that you're standing in the way of them achieving their destiny. Would it be better if every Aasimar was a paragon of good and niceness? Probably, but I'm not going to pretend that otherworldly deities actually care about the decorum of their most loyal servants. When a deity wants to send a divine message to all of their disciples and various offspring, they aren't really going to stick around long enough to discuss the most ethical way to achieve their goals. They're going to let the Aasimar decide how much blood they have to shed, and then leave it up to the celestial guide afterwards to determine if they've committed any violations that might reflect badly on the deity. Every group seems to have an Aasimar that is tasked to keep the party from getting in trouble. The problem with this is that sometimes trouble can be a lot of fun, and it sucks always having to do the right thing because Saint Buzzkill over here doesn't want to get chewed out by his celestial HR lady. I kind of feel for Aasimars though, because between their disapproving celestial daddy and a team of micromanaging celestial guides, there are a lot of people that will yell at them anytime they do something even a little evil. It doesn't make me think they're any less annoying for shutting down the party's fun plan, but I do understand why they do it. If by some miracle the Aasimar is actually pretty lax when it comes to obeying the law and serving their divine purpose, it's going to be very hard to convince the criminals you interact with that they're in fact not a paladin. So whether intentional buzzkill or not, the Aasimar is going to be hard to bring around in any campaign that requires the party to break the law. Even if the poor guy hides his appearance, refuses to speak, and just tries to tag along with the party, the warm glow of his angelic skin will alert every guard within a mile. It is pretty hard to break into the king's castle when you're walking around with a human-sized glow stick. So yeah, Aasimars, the self-righteous, self-illuminating, and self-proclaimed heroes of the fantasy world. In reality, they're divine middle managers who have a martyr complex because they get beaten up by divine upper management all day, and only inflict a fraction of that wrath onto the rest of the adventuring party. However, it is usually hard to find a person that is willing to be a dedicated healer. So when you find someone whose whole aesthetic screams divine user, that makes them someone very desirable in an adventuring party. And while the Aasimar may claim that they're above hanging out with a bunch of murder hobos, they seem to have the party's back when things get really dire. But I cannot stress enough that they will constantly let you know what you're doing is wrong before helping you do it. That is why Aasimars are fantasy's most heavenly hall monitors. What fantasy race is so insecure about their looks that they had to put their lineage in their name so you wouldn't keep asking if they're Lizardfolk? If you said Dragonborn, you'd be correct. When you get told that you can't play a dragon in your tabletop game, you'll likely end up picking these guys because you saw their name, but very quickly you find out that you are looking for a half-dragon. You know, the one with wings, claws, and the ability to actually breathe fire. Although these guys are usually well over 6 foot, you can't help but feel like they lied to you on a dating profile because they really exaggerated their dragon traits. In some lore, they even claim that their ancestors totally had wings until they lost their noble status. You want me to believe that their flight speed is tied to their notoriety? So what, if you become a mayor and run a successful business, does that mean your kids will get the glide ability? Yeah, right. Normally, races with a cool magical lineage get cool powers to go with it. Dragonborns just have a family history of acid reflux that lets them burp out a few sparks that they swear is the same as a breath weapon. The only reason I even believe that they are Dragonborn instead of a Lizardfolk with an odd skin condition is because they mention their daddy issues about as often as a Tiefling. Don't let them gaslight you, ladies. Most of them don't even have a tail. You want to date a dragon person without a tail? Dragonborn are known for their ability to be a complete buzzkill in their quest to preserve their people's honor. I guess they saw how much flack paladins get for being the party's hall monitor, and for some reason they decided that this was actually their true calling in life. So no matter what class and backstory they play, you can look forward to their constant cosplaying as a dragon and LARPing as a paladin. And if they actually are a Dragonborn paladin, that means they've bought into their own hype, and probably think they are the chosen one who will finally bring their clan to greatness. I don't have the heart to tell them that dragons could care less about the prosperity of Dragonborn. In fact, they may somehow care less about Dragonborn than they do about kobolds, which is saying something. That won't stop them from constantly trying to restore honor to their clan in a futile attempt to get their dragon daddy's approval. Half the time, they don't even know for sure which one they're supposed to be a descendant of and just default to one of the big ones. I really want to feel bad for the Dragonborn and their constant need for approval, but I can't because they won't shut up about it. Plus, they'll be the first to shame the party for being reckless and selfish, but then given the chance themselves, they'll jump into battle aiming for that honorable death to immortalize themselves to their fellow Dragonborn. Tiamat still doesn't care, dude. Have you ever noticed that every time a Dragonborn introduces themselves that their name gets longer? I've never met a fantasy race that likes names as much as them. They'll have their birth name that, if you're lucky, will be short like Rogar. Then of course they get a clan name, so it'll be like Rogar of Clan Who Gives a Damn. Most people would stop there, but Dragonborn aren't most people. Then they have to add their childhood name, which I guess is just the first time they accomplish something, and instead of getting an award and putting it on the fridge, they just add it onto their name because of course they do. So now you have Rogar Who Gives a Damn Shield Chomper because in their first battle they bit through the enemy's tower shield to get to them. But wait, there's more, because at the end there are endless opportunities to add titles for every accomplishment that they did in their adulthood. So now if you happen to be with a level 5 Dragonborn who has a couple quests completed, that means they'll introduce themselves as Rogar Who Gives a Damn Shield Chomper, the holy flame of the Northwest Land and blessed protector of the East South Land. Which, mind you, while I'm sure the townsfolk at the time appreciated the party defending the orc hordes heading their way, if these peasants had to sit through the Dragonborn's introduction every time they encountered him in town, I bet they would be begging for the orc raiders to return to finish them off. The only thing worse than a noble who tries to throw their name around to get free stuff is a washed up one that still thinks anyone cares about them. Sure, maybe people are willing to put up with your ridiculous 20-syllable name when you could have had them executed, but having the party have to sit through it at a tavern when you're ordering an ale is a bit much. At best, you'll get a bartender that is old enough to recognize a last name and go, "Oh yeah, I remember hearing about that clan. Shame what happened to them." I'm half convinced that the Dragonborn sacrificed the flame pouch in their throat that helps them breathe fire in order to make room for a larger larynx, with vocal cords strong enough to handle the endless amount of yapping this character needs to spew. Dragonborn will bring up the entire unabridged history of their people if you just make eye contact with them. If Dragonborn are truly trying to live up to their name, then why are all of them broke adventurers? They talk a big game and claim to enjoy the finer things in life, but every Dragonborn that I've seen has spent most of their days taking odd jobs and camping in the woods. You can call it adventuring all you want, but a true dragon would be amassing wealth in a way that doesn't have them at the beck and call of whichever townsfolk happens to have 100 gold on them. And for the record, liking jewelry and gold doesn't make you a dragon by itself. Everyone likes having money and power, but a dragon will actually strike fear in the hearts of entire kingdoms. People willingly give away their treasure to these dragons to avoid their wrath. No one is afraid enough of a Dragonborn to do that. Maybe it's the fact that a dragon can actually fly to their town and raze it to the ground. For some reason, Dragonborns feel like they have a unique struggle because they are outsiders with strange blood coursing through their veins. But let's just take a moment to think about the dozens of fantasy races that have some random magical blood in their lineage. Just about every magical creature that you can think of has slept with a human and has resulted in a new fantasy race. I'd even argue that a race like Tieflings has it much worse because there is no sense of communal pride among them. In fact, many of them feel a deep shame and choose to run off on their own because of it, which puts them in a much better position than most. Plus, Dragonborn have their clans to lean on for help. So are you just mad that their clans are run worse than dwarves? Is it possible that this fantasy race is more smug than an elf and more stubborn than a dwarf? Yikes. The one thing a Dragonborn actually does have that you can find in a real dragon is a sense of superiority. They somehow manage to cram a gargantuan-sized ego perfectly into a medium-sized humanoid creature. Every Dragonborn must have little man syndrome because they think they're these big scary dragons while being a tenth of their size. And when you take into account their lackluster damage resistances and breath weapons, alongside their complete lack of wings or a tail, it is kind of impressive that they have an ego at all. At least Tieflings look like they could be a direct descendant of whatever hellspawn they came from. Most Dragonborn look like the domesticated house pet version of a dragon at best. Their teeth are such a non-factor that I don't even think they get a bonus for biting anyone, even though any real dragon would have that as their go-to method for finishing off their vastly outmatched prey. So yeah, Dragonborn, the most overconfident and underwhelming dragon-adjacent race in fantasy. They'll keep trying to bring honor and glory to both the party and their clan, even if they will likely never achieve these ambitious goals. And in a world where most adventurers are only in it for their own personal gain, it's just nice to know that you have a big lizard man at the table who isn't going to backstab you just because you happen to grab a piece of loot they wanted, which again kind of hurts their case of being just like a dragon. That is why Dragonborn are fantasy's most delusional reptiles. What fantasy race lives in total darkness, commits unspeakable war crimes, and looks like they're trying to bring back the goth movement? The answer is Drow. Drow are maybe the only elves that should have dark vision, given the fact that they live in the Underdark, which is just a giant cave system that they've convinced themselves is an underground nightclub scene. Listen, your civilization isn't some hidden gem that people are dying to get into, and in spite of them living in this literal hellscape underground, they'll act like you're the one living in a hole. They'll frown on surface dwellers for lacking sophistication, while they live in a fungus-covered cavern giving off toxic fumes and have to brush away about 1,000 spiders off their bed before going to sleep for the night. Let's make some things clear, suspicious webweaver. The only reason you constantly throw shade is because you're allergic to sunlight. Drow culture runs almost entirely on backstabbing others to gain a tiny bit more power, which makes every Drow government basically a multi-level marketing scheme where if you murder 2 of your friends and amass the power they got from murdering 2 of their friends, and repeat the process a couple of times, you eventually get to have the same quality of life that most surface-dwelling elves get without having to murder their entire extended family. It seems like Drow society treats betrayal like some kind of Olympic sport because whoever betrays the most people is celebrated like a champion instead of a bad person. This must be great for more ambitious Drow because whenever they go to the HR department to complain about their boss, the lady at the desk just hands them a poison dagger. But if you're even a slightly sane Drow, that means you have to skip town before anyone else catches on because they'll confuse your humanity for weakness. Every Drow player claims to be a tortured anti-hero. Even if half the party is haunted by their past, the Drow will claim that only their edge is truly justified, which is a bit insulting to the half-elf rogue that has been brooding and monologuing in the dark corners of the inn way before people considered Drows as a playable character option. If you want to sit on the opposite side of the tavern as him, sharpening your daggers and muttering about your heritage, that is fine, but we respect our elders here. Either all of it is cringe or none of it is cringe, buddy. Wearing all black and having an ancestor who is the literal manifestation of evil isn't unique to Drow. In fact, I can probably name more fantasy races capable of having that backstory than I can't. And that is only because people keep telling me that gnomes aren't inherently evil, but I've seen the horrors that they inflict on campaigns. You can't fool me. Lolth is less of a deity to the Drow and more of an abusive cult leader that's entire thing is constantly telling her followers that they aren't doing enough. Like, let's talk about the fact that she'll randomly make two of her most loyal followers fight to the death and only give a temporary blessing and the ability to keep the loser's possessions as a reward. Killing off half of your most promising recruits doesn't really sound like an effective way to grow a religion or run a civilization. While elves are often mocked for being talented but not willing to do anything productive, I'd argue that Drow are just as talented and much more ambitious, but as a society, they constantly self-sabotage. Drow are better off worshipping the Dungeon Master at this point because if they're already going to randomly kill and loot everything that their deity puts in front of them, then let their deity ban PvP among Drow and grant them blessings in the form of XP. The Underdark is basically just an infinite monster spawner, so there will be no shortage of targets to satisfy the Drow's bloodlust. Kick Lolth to the curb, give them a month or two without engaging in betrayal, and they'll level up enough to be able to conquer the surface world. I'm not saying that Drow culture is designed specifically to resemble a BDSM kink, but I am saying that if you were to create a fantasy race that does all those things, that you'd end up with something resembling the Drow, but hopefully with a lot less spiders. Call me a prude, but I like my bedroom completely free of spiders. I actually love the gothic aesthetic, and with everyone having dark vision, you can't really blame them for every temple being dimly lit. But anyone that has tried to use a whip inside an enclosed area knows that Drow have better weapon options for close quarters combat. You already know that I think that their Spider Queen isn't exactly a positive influence on Drow culture, but I like her influence on Drow society even less when I start to think about all her most loyal followers just being simps. Every Drow player will constantly let the party know that they are not like the others. Half the time, they end up still being evil for fun and have to be kicked out of the party, but they'll claim that their siblings were way worse, as if that excuse would let them off the hook for robbing every villager they come across. I get that Drow families can be rough, but the real reason that you left the Underdark isn't because you were a better person, it was because you were looking for easier targets. Luckily, the other half of the time, the Drow is actually telling the truth about being good. Somehow, they grew up with people trying to corrupt their heart of gold from a young age and still came out the Underdark as a saint in the making. You know what that makes them though? Stubborn and foolish, because they aren't looking for a redemption arc for themselves. They're trying to redeem their entire people. Very rarely will you see a Drow be on a personal redemption arc to atone for their own sins. It's funny when you think about it. They are still betraying the other Drow, but this time it's because they are a good person. Drow like to commit atrocities and think they have perfected them. It isn't good enough for Drow to do evil things for personal gain. They have to pretend like their vile acts are part of a personal lifestyle brand. As much as I'm sure that a cosmetic brand called Sacrifice by Lolth could make a killing on the retail shelves just like it does in dark temples throughout the Underdark, people don't really care how on brand that spider-shaped knife is. That is cutting into their flesh. Drow will brag about their basic bad guy accomplishments like, "We massacred an entire city in the name of our goddess." Oh, so you're like the orc raiders that my party defeated at level 3? You know, just because your bad deeds are done in a way that looks expensive, that doesn't make them art, right? It just makes them extra. The truth is that the Drow under all that pageantry are just another faction in the Underdark that likes enslaving people and killing anyone who is dumb enough to travel near their settlements. In fact, if they hate their fellow houses and actively kill any merchants that try to come into town, I don't even know how the Drow have anything nice at all. Surely half the items circulating the Drow economy are actively harmful to the consumer, and the rest are cheap knockoffs. So yeah, Drow, everyone's favorite subterranean elf variant, and the drama queens of the Underdark, that think good taste makes up for bad actions. They may in fact be the hardest working elves in your campaign setting, but that doesn't mean that they're always working in the party's best interests. I'd avoid letting them take the first watch during your adventures on the road until you get a better idea of their motivations. If you manage to go a couple weeks without them stabbing someone to death that you told them not to, you're in luck. A Drow that's able to shake their murderous impulses is definitely a capable ally to have in your journeys. Just make sure to get them a stylish umbrella with a blade in the hilt to help them with their light sensitivity. A Drow will always respect something that can help them be functional and fashionable on the battlefield. Sure, they may use it off the battlefield too in order to get a cheap shot in, but you can't expect them to fully change their ways. That is why Drow are fantasy's most fabulous war criminals. When you think of these things, what fantasy race comes to mind? That's right, kids, dwarves. Rocks, grudges, and alcohol. That's it. That's a cultural triangle. Their entire society is underground, forged from stone, and soaked in ale. Every city is packed to the brim with forges, breweries, and shouting about grievances that occurred 10 generations ago. Oh, we live in the halls of our ancestors. Cool, bro. You also live in a volcano. That ancestral pride doesn't make me want to live in a place that smells like sulfur and hasn't been aired out since the dawn of your civilization. Literally every dwarf kingdom in fantasy has one of two backstories. We built a glorious mountain city, it was perfect, now it's full of spiders. We dug too deep, found something evil, and now it's full of ghosts. That's it, that's the pattern. You could randomly generate an entire campaign setting just by asking, okay, what cursed thing did the dwarves uncover this time? Ancient demons, it's possible. Undead kings, more than likely. Giant worms, almost definitely. Maybe if you guys just took a break from spending all your time trying to dig to the center of the earth, you wouldn't keep releasing literal hell. Dwarves don't just like making things. They make things mainly to brag about how hard it was. Making anything has to take months, or otherwise people might think that it's not crafted well enough. Craft beer has to take several months to be fermented. Every piece of armor must be crafted to handle every war for the next 3 centuries. And even a simple pickaxe needs to be crafted to handle a million swings, even though they'll just lose it fleeing from whatever evil they manage to mine towards in a few days. I'd be more impressed with their craftsmanship if they just let it speak for itself and wouldn't keep telling me over and over again how impressive it was. I'll admit that having gear that will outlive your great-great-grandson is impressive, but dwarves have a knack for misplacing their most impressive weapons and armor. It's almost like they want every future dwarf to spend their life looking for the family's long-lost treasures. Maybe a few of those dwarf descendants had a passion they wanted to pursue, besides finding granddad's lost warhammer and great-grandma's golden locket. Can we get a dwarf who wants to be good at something that's a little more short-term, like a baker? You know, something that lasts only a few days before it goes bad? Dwarves don't just have facial hair, they have beards right out of the womb, and then it just keeps growing from there. Ever heard of a dwarf shaved to see if they look better without one? Their beards are sacred, and how they identify just how successful of a dwarf they are. If a dwarf actually does shave their beard, that's not a fashion choice. That's a death sentence. That's like getting excommunicated and kicked out of the clan. Every dwarf clan has beard rituals, beard combs, beard braiding traditions, likely even beard duels. Not sure how that works, but they'll probably shun you for not knowing how beard duels work either. These guys are just weird when it comes to beards. Dwarves have beef with elves, orcs, goblins, trolls, humans, other dwarves, and the concept of basic hygiene. They are a grudge-based species after all. That's their mechanic in some game systems. In Warhammer, they actually write down their grudges in a book, like canonically. An entire book full of people they hate. That's not a racial feature, that's a red flag. Oh, my great-great-grandfather was insulted by her father about his craftsmanship 200 years ago. Cool, guess we have to fight now? Don't really know who you are, but I guess I have to uphold my father's honor? Apparently dwarves never forget and never let go. If a dwarf is not in a tavern, they're on their way to a tavern or building a new tavern or fighting someone over a tavern they lost in a bet. Alcohol is not a pastime for dwarves, it's a lifestyle. You could replace every healing potion with a pint of ale and they'd be fine with it. They don't drink juice, they don't do water, they drink beer, and beer has all the fluids they need. Even their religion is like 70% brewing techniques and 30% tips on maintaining their forge. Dwarves in fantasy are usually the most tech-savvy race, but only within their strict dwarven limits. Those limits being that they have to involve steam and gears. They can build a steam-powered artillery with lots of gears, mechanical traps that grind you in between some industrial-sized steam-powered gears, and tanks that, to no one's surprise, operate off steam and numerous gears. They can invent just about anything with those two things, except indoor plumbing. Like, hear me out, a steam-powered shower? The gears can be hot and cold or something, just please start bathing. Oh, we invented this new invention called an elevator. It allows us to go deeper into the mountain. Cool, can you build one that takes me to the surface every once in a while? No. I love how every dwarven stronghold is basically a multi-level dungeon waiting to collapse. Have you ever noticed that? It's like they want to leave behind a dungeon to be plundered by a band of adventurers. Endless bridges over bottomless pits, pressure plate death traps, lava waterfalls that lead to a forge just letting molten liquid splash all over, and spinning gear elevators with no handrails. Who designed this place, Bowser? Dwarves claim that their structures are built to last and always brag about how grand their home was. And then they build their home inside an active volcano, under a dragon's lair, with an unsealable entrance to the Underdark. That's some prime real estate, buddy. I can see why your ancestors decided to settle there. Have you ever seen a dwarf admit they were wrong? Have you ever witnessed a dwarf ask for directions? Have you ever tried to get a dwarf to accept help from an elf? I didn't think so. All their successes were over 1,000 years ago. Nowadays, they're too stubborn to try anything new because that means their ancestors didn't know best. Dwarves don't consider their pride a flaw though. They consider it their greatest asset. They believe that if they weren't so stubborn, they'd have gone extinct by now. They'll go down swinging with a battle axe in hand against hordes of enemies, genuinely thinking that they'll take down every last one of them. It's really a miracle that their collective stubborn pride hasn't gotten them all killed. Dwarves don't just build things, they forge legacies. Every item is an artifact, every stone has a name, every hammer is Hammer of the Second Anvil Bearer, he who wields the power to crack the sky with his swings. Okay, but does it really hit hard or is that just marketing? Of course it does, it was blessed by the Forge Father and passed down 5 generations. I mean, it looks nice, but if it isn't a +2 weapon, it isn't better than what I'm currently using. I really don't care whose grandfather made it. So yeah, dwarves, fantasy's grumpiest, drunkest, most heavily armored uncles. They're loud, they're resilient, they're proud, and they will absolutely pick a fight with you at the tavern if you look at them the wrong way. They dig too deep, they drink too much, and they'll never admit the downsides of either. Every party needs one, so you can have a punching bag that will hurl insults back at you. And they are definitely fantasy's most pretentious hipsters. Which fantasy race is the first to complain about something, the most capable at resolving that issue, but the last to contribute? You guessed it, elves. Let's talk about how elves are basically what happens when you give a spoiled trust fund kid immortality and zero accountability. They're always the oldest race, the wisest, the most in tune with nature, the best at magic, the most refined culture, and yet somehow they're never around when an ancient evil awakens and starts terrorizing the countryside. Where are they when the world's ending? Oh, sorry, we don't interfere with mortal affairs. We're above that. Yeah, I'm sure that death cult summoning their god will just stop at your kingdom after exterminating every city. After much discussion, the councils decide to postpone further talks until next month. The demise of half the known world has been tragic, but now is not the time for hasty decisions. We still do not know what this threat is capable of, and more importantly, we do not know yet if a random band of adventurers will wipe it out for us. I'd hate to get all prepared for war, march to the battlefield, and then find out that our presence was unnecessary. Elves live for centuries and still can't get their cities restored from the last great tragedy from 900 years ago. Like, what have you been doing this whole time? Oh, I've been charting the stars and composing harpsichord duets with dryads. That's great, Dionysus, but the orcs are already storming the town center because you've never rebuilt that impenetrable gate that fell in the last raid. Maybe pick up something a little more sturdy than a harp to fend them off. Wood elves are basically fantasy eco-terrorists. They love nature. No, really love it. So much so that they will absolutely murder any non-elf race for cutting down an endangered tree species that they could have helped preserve a century ago, but couldn't be bothered until there was only a dozen of them left. They live in forests that magically alter those who enter so they can never leave, whisper cryptic messages that make them go mad, or just outright eat trespassers. And you're telling me the forest needs protection from a human peasant who just needs a few logs for firewood? Respect the forest, they say, while dropping a whole panther out of a tree to attack a wandering merchant. Calm down, Knife Ears. He was just trying to sell apples to the neighboring town. And yes, no harm came to that apple tree. Elves are the Mary Sues of fantasy races. They're fluent in 5 languages by age 12, have mastered 2 schools of magic, and somehow skip the awkward acne that comes with puberty. Their very few tragedies are usually self-inflicted and romanticized to the point that you can hardly be sympathetic to them. Oh no, our ancient city was consumed by flame when we flew too close to the sun in pursuit of beauty. Yeah, my city was consumed in flames by that dragon that you guys just ignored for 3 centuries. You can't even talk to elves in game without it turning into a lecture about some barely relevant piece of elven lore about the one time you guys were actually useful a millennia ago. Like, we get it. You're educated on this ancient opponent we had to drag you here to confront. The barbarian just needs to know where the monster's weak point is so he can swing at it. We don't need a full dissertation. And now we get to High Elves, the biggest offenders. These guys act like they built the world by hand and were nice enough to let the rest of us rent space. You were just the elves that came first, and honestly, what you've accomplished with this much of a head start isn't impressive. They look down on literally everyone, including other elves. Humans are crude, dwarves are drunk, halflings are simple, tieflings are demons, and Dragonborn, well, okay, everyone hates interacting with Dragonborn. And yet somehow, despite all their magical knowledge and ancient wisdom, they still manage to get enslaved, mind-controlled, corrupted, or blown up in every other campaign setting. How can you be the wisest race and still fall for the same catastrophes over and over? Have you ever noticed how elf architecture always seems to involve carving out and cramming in a bunch of junk inside those ancient trees they claim to want to protect so much? It's always white marble, glowing blue crystal, and then they treat those poor overburdened trees like it's an accent wall. Okay, cool. Can you design a decent bathroom, or do I need to go behind a different, less ancient tree and hope it isn't one of those sentient ones that'll attack me? Let's not forget how their weapons are elegant with exaggerated curves and their combat styles graceful, because elves want you to know that they aren't even really trying to win in combat. They would rather die than do something the practical way, and all their talent is wasted on a race who thinks it's beneath them to fight at their full strength. Elves are always stacked. High dexterity, great perception, resistance to being charmed. They don't sleep, they trance. So while the rest of the party is rolling for watch shifts so they don't lose sleep and setting up traps around camp, your elf is sitting cross-legged by the fire, rubbing it in that they could take a double shift, but it's not their fault you have weak mortal bodies. Wait, you're telling me that you heard the ambush approaching camp and didn't say anything? I didn't feel like helping. Despite being immortal, beautiful, and gifted, every elf has the emotional depth of a Tumblr post from 2009. My heart is burdened with the memories of a forgotten age. Dude, you broke up with them a century ago, and literally 100 girls want to date you. It's your choice that you're single. Stop fishing for attention. Every elf is secretly carrying some great burden, some lost love, or ancient duty. You know what would be refreshing? An elf that's just actually fulfilled in life, doing some hard labor. Not just some self-loathing art school dropout who will never find purpose because then the art will suffer. I'm suffering enough listening to you, buddy, and I haven't even seen your art yet. So yeah, elves, the fantasy equivalent of the kid in your college class who brings up philosophy to flex their intelligence unprompted. Every setting has them, every player's tried them at some point, and every dungeon master hates that all elves have dark vision, even though most of these guys don't like caves. They're better than you and they know it. That's why elves are fantasy's most successful races. What fantasy race can give you an entire lecture on the laws of physics and then randomly cast a spell that bends reality and destroys all those laws immediately after? The answer is gnomes. A goblin will build a bomb because they think it's funny to see something blown up into a million pieces. A gnome will build a bomb to do the same thing, succeed with ease, and then spend the next 6 months messing with their schematics until it's able to blow things up into a million pieces. As much as people are afraid of the chaotic destruction a goblin can bring, you should really be afraid of someone who brings an academic approach to their destruction. When you're dealing with a mad tinkerer, you want to deal with the DIY ankle biter that's pissed off about something petty, not the disgraced professor that's about to show that their thesis on cold fusion was correct and is about to prove it by wiping out the university that denied them tenure. Gnomes seem to be highly intelligent but lack all wisdom. Sure, they might know how everything works on a mechanical level, but they forget that sometimes just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. Many gnome inventors have been lost over the years, testing out fully functional jetpacks because they also forgot to invent an equally functional landing pad. There is always a chance that your new high-speed vehicle is actually so fast that traditional brakes no longer work, but you're not going to be able to convince a gnome excited about their new Speedinator consider 9,000, that maybe a couple laps around the laboratory parking lot is in order before they spend the rest of the research budget on a new racetrack that they'll just smash through on the first turn. Gnomes don't really interact with magic the same way that others do. I believe they are masters of illusions because they have such a firm grasp on the laws of reality that they're the only ones that know how to bend them. Call it their Fey ancestry or just their curious nature, letting them come up with new ways to get around the laws of the universe. But the end result is something that resembles an unholy alliance of magic and science. It seems like gnomes don't really see much difference between waving a wand and twisting some gears. To them, magic is like an advanced level of applied physics that the rest of the fantasy races just don't seem to grasp, no matter how many times your party's gnome tries to explain it. When you really get down to it, what's the difference between a steam-powered automaton and an air elemental? For some reason, your party's gnome knows how to make more of them, so that's all that matters. I often forget that gnomes have Fey ancestry, but then one of them invents a glitter bomb and throws it into my bag of holding, and now every time I pull out a potion, it looks like I purchased it at a rave. The pranks that a gnome is able to pull off put even the longest living natives of the Feywild to shame. When you have a brilliant mind and a mischievous nature, you get a prankster in your party whose shenanigans will piss you off so badly that you're asking for deities you don't even worship to smite the gnome on a weekly basis. The Feywild has talking animals, floating islands, and trees that seem to whisper your deepest secrets to you, but give the gnome some time and they can create devices that do all of that. Where most Fey can only twist what is known to make things appear off, gnomes seem to constantly break the limits of what is possible, and I find that a lot more unsettling. If you want to know the difference between a halfling and a gnome, ask a basic question and see how they respond. If it's a halfling, they'll probably not be paying attention, and if they are a gnome, then make sure you get comfortable because you're about to get a 2-hour lecture on it. Gnomes are very knowledgeable about things and overly eager to share, but sometimes when you're an adventurer in a hostile environment, the ability to remain quiet is the difference between life and death. I get that the gnome in your party is excited to talk about the history of the mine that you're descending into, and the many uses for copper ore, but maybe you should keep quiet until you figured out what killed all those miners. Usually when I want a halfling to shut up, I hand them a snack, but when I want to keep the gnome preoccupied, anything that I hand them will get dismantled within a minute. Gnome culture can only be described as a wholesome nightmare, where the chaos of a mad scientist laboratory clashes with the kindness of grandma's house. Sure, there's hazardous materials everywhere from ongoing experiments, but there's also some fresh-baked cookies. Just make sure that the gunpowder doesn't get blended in with the flour mix again. They just finished rebuilding the town again from last month's bake sale. Socially, gnomes seem to be aggressively friendly. I personally think it's because they're trying to hide their actual agenda, and to them, the best defense against questioning their actions is a good offense. If they're always the one dominating the conversation about why their invention is a good thing, you might not realize all the alternative and more deadly ways their gadgets can be used. It's not that I don't believe them about building an invention that can heat up the entire town from a distance using nothing but electromagnetic radiation. I'm just saying that it looks and sounds an awful lot like you're trying to build a death ray. Every gnome is just one bad day away from a full-on supervillain arc, and the scary part is they don't even realize it. All it really takes is someone shunning Trixie Tinkerspell's latest invention, and suddenly becomes their life's work to lock themselves away in their workshop muttering about how one day everyone will understand that their inventions work. The only problem is that it wasn't that no one believed that their devices could work, it's just that when she invented the vacuum, everyone was grateful. But she had to slap a nuclear reactor on her latest model to clean up her home in a fraction of the time. That little upgrade ended up leveling half the city. Her solution wasn't to make more of her older vacuums to clean up her mess. Instead, she gave it another try by making a network of steam-powered automatons that ended up rising against her and destroying what was left of her city. It is no wonder so many gnome hometowns are uninhabitable. You only need one ambitious gnome to ruin everything. And newsflash, every single one of them is endlessly curious and equally eager to prove themselves to the world. The world, on the other hand, is just begging them to get a hobby that is less dangerous. So yeah, gnomes, fantasy's tiniest engines of chaos. They will be the first to explain why something won't work, but then be able to put together some bullshit that does work. This is the part where I normally end up complimenting the race for actually being one of my favorite fantasy races. But as a proud goblin, I'm making a public service announcement that gnomes cannot be trusted. Sure, goblin inventions backfire about 50% of the time, but what we lack in skill, we make up for in heart. Please consider adopting a goblin that is raiding your local village. They are much easier to train and... Fine, I'll do it. You normally don't know how a gnome ended up in the party, but even with all the yapping and hijinks, a gnome will quickly prove themselves valuable. Just make sure to keep a safe distance whenever they start to get too excited. Whatever they're about to try and pull off has a splash zone, and you're already in it. That is why gnomes are fantasy's most deranged tinkerers. Which fantasy race has both crazy ankle-biting gremlins and the most influential merchants and weapon manufacturers in the realm? For some reason, the answer is goblins. Have you ever encountered a group of goblins early on in your adventures? The local town guard tells you all about a group of vicious raiders that just terrorize the neighboring village, but when you actually encounter them expecting a tough gang of orcs or something, it's like someone just dropped a daycare into a war zone. Goblins are panicked ADHD gremlins with rusty knives and the confidence of a frat bro that just downed his third white monster. You could argue that they aren't really raiding the town on purpose, they're just hyperactive toddlers breaking everything that comes into contact with them. And you'll never fight just one goblin. You fight 12, all screaming, all biting, and all running in different directions. They're usually not much of a tactical threat, but they are definitely an environmental hazard. You aren't really providing the city with protection, it's more like disaster relief. Goblins don't use swords, they use whatever was lying around at the time. A rusty pitchfork? Sure. A broken chair leg covered in nails? Absolutely. A live raccoon tied to a stick? Definitely. And it works, because goblins are the masters of madness. If there's a way to turn a cooking pot into a landmine, they've done it. And it'll be the thing that nearly wipes out your party. Never underestimate a goblin's ability to mess up constructing their latest weapon, but still somehow getting the result they wanted. For example, you might find a few goblins shaking down a small farm town by threatening to burn their crops unless they pay a handful of silver. And 2 days later, they've created a disintegration ray that misses the farmland completely and tears a hole in the local keep that allows easy access to the town's treasury. Goblins are living proof that trial and error eventually works if you just ignore the trial part. So, are goblins idiots or are they evil geniuses? The answer to both is yes. Because sometimes they're bouncing off the wall and screaming at each other over shiny bags of loot, and other times they've engineered a 12-layer dungeon full of traps, puzzles, alchemy labs, and complete with an escape hatch to their mostly functional getaway zeppelin. Depending on the day, they act like cannon fodder or unholy little Einsteins. But if you get enough of them in a room at once, you'll always have a mix of both, and that's terrifying. I'd like to imagine that some of fantasy's most successful arm dealers are just goblins who got completely hammered and had a wacky idea, wrote it on the back of some local tavern's menu before passing out, and when they woke up hungover with that menu in hand said, "Wow, whoever wrote this is a genius. I can sell these things for millions of gold." Goblin lairs are a war crime in building code form. Ladders that go nowhere, bridges made out of spikes, poorly tied ropes, and just a little hope. Open flames next to hastily constructed wooden structures. And every ceiling is too low on purpose. They don't really like accommodating larger guests. Goblins aren't trying to build homes, they're building death traps for fun. And let's talk a little bit more about these traps. Good God, the traps. All these pressure plates, fake doors, spike floors, exploding barrels, and booby traps are designed with childlike wonder and adult-level malice. They say idle hands are the devil's playthings, but these little demon spawns seem to have pretty busy hands and are always putting together more and more evil contraptions. Goblins are monsters until they're merchandisable. The second you make one slightly cute, slightly quirky, or just brand friendly, suddenly they're all adorable little angels. Oh look, this one likes shiny things and dances. Don't you want to adopt him? And honestly, I get it. We all have to adopt Boblin the Goblin, so the Dungeon Master has to keep doing his silly high-pitched voice. And yes, I bought a few Goblin plushies over the years, but you can't spend 40 years making goblins the most murderable species in the monster manual, and then say, actually, they're just a little guy. Goblins can now just pretend to be chaos gremlins who don't know any better. They'll try to light your tent on fire, and when you catch them in the act, they'll tell you about how grateful they are that you took them out of that damp, cold cave where you found them. You're getting played, take it from me. Even friendly-looking goblins are up to no good. When a player picks a goblin, you already know what kind of campaign this is about to become. No backstory, no morals, just, I bite the wizard so he'll stop talking. I loot the noble while you guys are busy talking to him. I ride the barbarian into battle like a warhorse. Your Dungeon Master will just sigh and let it happen because there's no plot that you can write that a goblin player character won't derail through a series of cosmically chaotic events, and even consequences won't stick. Their dumb luck always bails them out. Everything just seems to kind of pan out for a goblin player character, even where other player characters would normally fail. It's like this race has plot armor that even surpasses a halfling's luck. Need some illegal weapons for that boss fight? Fake identities to sneak into town? A cursed artifact for that noble you hate? Check the alleyways and sewers for some goblins and you'll quickly find the local black market. These mad merchants have zero morals and all the connections. They've got stolen siege equipment, experimental spells, and relics borrowed from gods. They're also like the Amazon Prime of illegal fantasy goods, and if they don't have it, they'll find a way to get it to you in less than 2 days. Just be sure to not ask any questions and have the gold in hand upon delivery. You do not want to be on the black market's bad side. Plus, you're already banned from the town's only legitimate magic shop, so you're already out of options. Goblins are 3 feet tall, but can project their voices for miles. You'll definitely hear them before you see them. There's no such thing as a stealthy goblin, which is fine because a goblin ambush is never about stealth, it's about enthusiasm. They announce their presence like an FBI raid, and then kick down your door, crash through your walls, and fall through your ceiling. The fact that you can hear them coming from so far away still doesn't mean you'll be able to predict their next move. Goblins are an impossible enemy to prepare for, and they like it that way. By all logic, goblins shouldn't be alive. They charge at the biggest creatures they can find, they try to eat anything they can get their hands on, and yet they survive. The goblin with 4 hit points remaining dodges every attack because he trips at just the right time, and when the same goblin swings at your heavily armored fighter with his raccoon on a stick, he somehow manages to crit, and then the raccoon bites the fighter and that crits too. It's not a skill, it's not magic, it's the universe saying, let's see how far this idiot gets before you snap. You can't plan for goblin luck. You can't fight it. It's like the dice gods are bored and goblins are their favorite creatures. Your Dungeon Master just has to chuckle in disbelief as Boblin the Goblin of all people actually manages to down the final boss right when it was starting to look like a total party kill. Goblins, the unkillable, unreasonable, unstoppable gremlin tornadoes of fantasy. They will set your house on fire, steal your things, and then try to sell that stuff back to you the next town over, and somehow we love them for it. Because goblins don't care about rules, alignment, or strategy. They just want chaos, loot, and maybe a snack. That's why they are fantasy's most crazed capitalists. What fantasy race is full of meatheads that think more muscles and less clothing is the path to honor and glory? If you guessed Goliaths, congratulations, you've earned yourself a celebratory protein shake. When you ask your Dungeon Master if you can play a giant, they'll tell you that you already have a playable race of giants at home. And when you get home and start to make your character, they'll reveal that they were referring to Goliaths. And sure, Goliaths are tall, gray, and intimidating compared to a human. But you have to remember that even hill giants are twice as tall as them, and those normally are referred to as the smallest giants in most fantasy settings. So naturally, every Goliath character deep down is insecure about their height. So like every other short king with anger issues, they've they've decided to get jacked to make up for it. And I'll admit, their muscles paired with those tribal tattoos look amazing, but some cool tattoos aren't enough to make me care about another nomadic race of honor-bound brutes that are only slightly taller than Dragonborn or half-orcs. If the unique appeal to this race is that they're kind of tall, kind of buff, and kind of angry, I'd rather just play a gray orc and do a silly voice. Goliath society is stuck in this continuous cycle of competition to the point that it is basically their religion. It might be fun to say that you're the fastest or the strongest in your tribe for a bit, but you aren't thinking about the big picture. Anyone who goes out into the world and grinds to like level 5 is going to come back to their tribe and be praised as one of the most powerful Goliaths to have ever lived. Spending all day working out isn't really going to improve your strength modifier in any meaningful way. You have to remember that this is a world where if you go out and clear some dungeons, you can find a belt that gives you the strength of an actual giant and allows you to quadruple your old deadlift record by just waiting 24 hours for that belt to attune to you. Your allies can also just buff your ability to do things to the point where it's actually objectively better to obtain some magical gear and make connections with spellcasters who promise to cast these spells on you before each combat encounter. I admire their dedication to self-improvement, but no one cares if the barbarian with a +5 strength modifier is natty or not. The king just wants to make sure you're able to hit the evil lich really hard. I don't think I've ever seen a single Goliath with a shirt on. I get that all of Goliath society seems to be angry at even lightweight and breathable fabric, but I'd just like to remind everyone that barbarians can wear up to medium armor. Your gains from the gym aren't going to vanish just because a thin cotton shirt is hiding them. In fact, usually the most jack guys that I know are wearing layers, because they have nothing to prove, so it seems like Goliaths just have some kind of insecurity about their appearance. Maybe there's some lore reason why they always have to be shirtless, but I'm just not aware of it. Is it possible that their tattoos glow in the dark, but they have to sunbathe all day to absorb enough sunlight for it to be noticeable? If that's the case, then I guess I have to apologize to my party's Goliath, who seems to keep getting spotted by every monster we encounter while in a dungeon. I thought it was the constant screaming and grunting that was giving away our position, but maybe it was the faint glow of their tribal tattoos that did it. Probably not though. Technically, you can play a Goliath bard or wizard, but no one is actually going to sit down and do that. A shunned Goliath with an odd skill set would honestly be the perfect adventurer candidate because they'd be someone who grew up in a competitive environment where they clearly excelled at something special, but were shamed by others for not just being good at lifting heavy things or running really fast. A Goliath like that would have the drive to perfect their class simply to show the entire tribe how wrong they were to not believe in them. But instead, most Goliath player characters fold to peer pressure and play Kara Stormcall, the bubbly barbarian who has way too much fun swinging their warhammer for glory and to help protect her friends. I'm sure Kara is a great gal, and sure, your party needs to have some big dumb softy protecting them in the front line, but don't you want to see a Goliath shred on a loot every once in a while, instead of just seeing another Goliath shredding through the enemies with an axe? It is impossible to talk to a Goliath without them turning it into an opportunity to brag. If you start to tell them about your day, they'll tell you about some random feat of strength that only vaguely relates to the story. For example, I could be venting about how I'm going through a divorce and my wife is taking half of everything, and the party Goliath would quickly chime in and say that they could split all my possessions in half with ease, and probably much quicker than my wife can. Yeah, that's great, man, but I'm just trying to have a real conversation here, and you're just waiting for an opportunity to bring up that time you wrestled a dragon and won. I get that Goliaths are obsessed with feats of strength because their powerful builds do allow for some crazy moments, but there is a fine line between trying to reassure your fellow adventurers that you're a capable teammate and making them concerned you have a death wish. If you constantly bring up your most reckless moments, the party will start worrying that one of these days you're going to try to go out in a blaze of glory that ultimately gets the party killed too. And can you really blame them? Every Goliath story to a sane person makes it sound like you took the most extreme course of action available and just brute forced it into working. Goliaths don't really do emotion unless that emotion is anger, of course. It seems like Goliath culture must associate every other emotion with weakness, because if you're the best at being happy or sad, that's not really a competition that they consider honorable to win. If you find yourself in a party with a Goliath that was abandoned by their tribe, then chances are it was because that Goliath was seen as soft. And trust me, there's nothing worse in Goliath society than being considered soft. Just because someone is a bit emotionally vulnerable from time to time doesn't mean that they can't rip their enemies in half. Their leadership is supposed to be based upon merit, so if their strongest fighter also happens to have some emotional depth to them, does it really matter? You'd be lucky to have a chief that is open to a little bit of constructive criticism instead of just beating to death anyone that has a problem with how they do things. Goliaths claim to be into the whole self-improvement thing until it comes down to increasing their emotional intelligence. Apparently, they think it's just another dump stat to make room for more strength bonuses. For some reason, Goliaths really hate having to think. I guess because the brain isn't considered a muscle, that means Goliaths have no interest in exercising it. That can be nice when you need your Goliath to slaughter an enemy without a second thought, or a first thought for that matter, but it does become a problem when you need to accomplish a mission that is more complicated than a random street fight. Your party can spend all day coming up with a detailed plan that involves disguises, fake identities, and perfectly forged documents, but you still have to pray that the whole thing doesn't go south just because a random guard asks the Goliath the hard-hitting question of, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Normally, when a party finds themselves in a sticky situation, they may attempt to handle things in a diplomatic way. Sadly, when you have a Goliath in the party, this isn't really an option. For most adventurers, when attacking would lead to certain death, violence wouldn't be the answer. But for the average Goliath in a situation like this, violence is the question, and the answer is always yes. Even if you spent the last 2 hours coaching them for this exact situation, they'll abandon the plan and start trying to fight their way out of the castle against overwhelming odds. So yeah, Goliaths. They may not show their affection well, refuse to wear a shirt, and hardly ever pay attention when you're talking to them, but if they have decided to adventure with you, that means they're willing to defend you to the death. Plus, they keep things interesting by being the idiot who accidentally kicks off combat early, and will refuse to let the party back down even when the situation seems dire. They have a reputation to uphold after all, and if you back down, it's going to make it look like he teamed up with a bunch of cowards, and that is a fate worse than death. That is why Goliaths are fantasy's most insecure gym bros. What fantasy race is presented as happy-go-lucky, but the moment you get one in your party, they always seem to act like a feral woodland gremlin? For legal reasons, the answer is Halflings. Let's be real here, the only reason that they're called Halflings is because that makes them legally distinct from hobbits. Sure, they might be a little more magically inclined than their Tolkien counterparts, but all the traits are still there. They are all short, hairy, and love food. They also hate conflict, so you have to drag them kicking and screaming to do anything productive. Halflings make terrible teammates since they're always too busy daydreaming about their next meal instead of watching your back. Much like hobbits, the only reason a halfling leaves their cozy village to adventure is the promise of some easy riches, and that they'll never have to work another day in their life. You shouldn't expect a brave hero. You should expect someone that vanishes in the middle of combat to see if the bandits have any leftovers in their fridge. After the fight, when challenged by the party's angry barbarian, a halfling will simply shrug and say, "Well, it looks like you guys had it handled," and continue to eat the cheese wheel that they found. You see, halflings have figured something out that the rest of the party has not. It doesn't matter how hard you tried in the dungeon. If you make it to the end of the journey alive, people will assume you're integral to the party's success. Everyone seems to praise Frodo for completing the Fellowship's mission, but Sam did all the heavy lifting. The lesson that halflings have taken from this tale is that attendance may be mandatory, but effort is optional. Every party with a halfling seems to understand that they're stuck with a quirky mascot that will get them in trouble. Unlike picking a random goblin from a cave and deciding that they'll tag along with you, this small animal companion fully expects the party to go to war for them since they're a fellow party member. So instead of getting the timid and helpful Boblin the Goblin, you get a washed-up bard named Has-Been Stoutfellow, who the barbarian has to keep rescuing from angry bar maidens who thought they were being courted by the baron of some made-up land called West of here. The purpose of the party mascot usually is to keep morale up and give the party someone to rescue if the dungeon master can't think of another way to move the plot along. But the halfling probably would enjoy getting kidnapped a little too much. I'm not saying that the halfling wants to get tied up, although that is probably true. I'm saying that they love being the center of attention and would keep trying to get the rest of the party to admit how much they missed them once the rescue mission was completed. Halflings seem to be in a perpetual state of ravenous hunger, like a growing teen with a bag of holding for his stomach. Most civilizations brag about how they have the best food in the land. But when you're eating 7 meals a day and opting into meals called second breakfast, there isn't enough time in the day to focus on making a quality dish. Halflings decided that they didn't need quality meals, so they invented the fantasy world's equivalent to fast food. Just coat anything remotely edible with enough sugar or salt, and suddenly you have dishes that you can eat all day, every day. I think that's similar to how dwarves drank themselves into a poison resistance. The halflings ate themselves into one by deep frying everything in sight. The scariest villain to a halfling is probably someone who wants them to go on a diet of only chicken and rice. If you introduce a villain like that to your campaign, the entire halfling population will be rallied to war by the end of the next session. Halflings are woodland gremlins that are better at hiding these traits than the average ankle-biter race. They'll put on an act and try to win you over with their charm, but the moment they can't get what they want out of you, peacefully they'll strike. The twinkle in their eye that you mistook for youthful innocence is really just them gleefully thinking of all the ways that they could end you. All halfling violence is premeditated violence, which is scary on its own, but then you remember these evil masterminds can do a lot more than just stab you. They'll use their charm and their stealth to sneak into the Baron's keep, murder him, and then plant that evidence in your bag. Now suddenly when the town guard comes looking for the party, the halfling has an alibi because everyone remembers their performance at the tavern across town. Somehow though, the town guard did hear a rumor that you went to bed early that night, and no one saw you during the time of the attack. And the worst part is that the halfling could have framed anyone for this crime, but decided to pin it all on you, just because you got tired of them making dick jokes every session. Whoever was the first interior designer in halfling culture really seemed to nail that cozy cottage aesthetic. All their homes feel like they belong on the cover of some magazine about getting back in touch with nature and how to start your own vegetable garden this spring. I can hardly blame them for not wanting to leave their homes when they all look that beautiful. But the real reason that halflings are hesitant to leave their home is because they're wanted across the kingdom for a series of successful heists. If a halfling always seems to have a large decor budget, it's because they aren't actually spending a dime. Apparently, the reason all their nice silverware looks familiar is because they stole it from the king during the last royal feast the party attended before they had to leave town. Every halfling likes to brag about how lucky they are, but the truth is that it comes at the expense of the rest of the party. Sure, maybe the halfling got to re-roll a few dice during the dragon encounter, but the only reason the party was in that cave is because the halfling wanted to sell some dragon eggs for some quick coin. The halfling may have came out of that combat unharmed, but the elf got half their face chewed off, and the dwarf got heat stroke from eating that flame breath while wearing his heavy plate armor. I feel like there's some sort of ancient evil that keeps giving halflings cosmically good luck, because they know that they'll kill hundreds of their companions over the course of their adventures. Even if the halfling isn't a warlock on purpose, they are still unknowingly sacrificing adventurer after adventurer to some dark patron of shenanigans and mischief. At a certain point, the party has to ask themselves if the halfling is actually a good luck charm, or if the rest of the party are just a lightning rod for the halfling's misfortune. You never see a halfling wizard or a paladin. Why is that? That's because the halfling always seems to play a class that doesn't require them to be disciplined or honest. They always opt into a life of degeneracy because they're already a glutton, so there's no harm in adding a bit of lust and greed to the mix. If you find a halfling holding down any stable job for an extended period of time, just assume that they are a front for the local thieves guild, because there's no way a halfling could become a baker and not go broke from eating all their inventory. Also, a traveling musician who barely makes enough to cover their stay at the inn for a night doesn't count as a real job either. I'm convinced that every traveling bard halfling is just someone that is either on the run from law enforcement or desperately behind on their debt payments. When you breed like rabbits, it is kinda hard to afford so many kids unless you are one of the richest adventurers in the land. So even if they intended at some point to bring back home the riches to their family, they kept becoming aware of more and more secret kids that now it would take an entire dragon's horde to pay off their debts. Halflings can never be taken seriously, even if they try really hard to be seen as tragic. If they tell you that their entire village was burned down in a tragic fire, your first thought is about how it likely started from an oven full of pies for your village's midday snack. And then your second thought is about a bunch of halflings running around on fire letting out high-pitched screams. Even though third-degree burns are no laughing matter, something about it happening to a halfling just makes it more lighthearted. That is why most halflings just accept their role as the class clown and try to keep everyone laughing when on the road. Halflings will always prioritize cracking themselves up over the party though, so don't be surprised when they keep pissing off the king, even after he threatened to have the entire party executed for questioning his rule. There is a chance that the halfling will have one really out of character serious moment that actually does land, and somehow that one act of heroism will immortalize him to the kingdom as the bravest hero to have ever lived. In order to get that moment though, you'll have to sit through 20 sessions of sex jokes and bad puns, so the party would probably argue that it wasn't worth the headache to get there. You better hope that moment of heroism involves sacrificing their life, otherwise the halfling will never let you hear the end of it, and use it as another way to pick up maidens at the bar. So yeah, halflings. They eat too much, they sleep too much, and brag about how lucky you guys are to have someone like them on the team. They're always willing to help as long as you don't make them work too hard or take time away from literally anything else they'd prefer to be doing at the moment. When they're directing their annoying energy at people you also hate, the catharsis you feel will be amazing. Halflings may not always live up to the idea of great things coming in small packages, but when their bad puns and antics do land, it's all the party will be quoting for the rest of the adventure. That is why halflings are fantasy's most fortunate freeloaders. Have you ever wanted to play as yourself in a fantasy setting and just cringe at the idea of being a hairy midget or a twink with pointy ears? There is one race that might just be perfect for you. Can you guess what it is? That's right, humans. Humans are the vanilla ice cream of fantasy races. They're what you pick when you don't know what else to choose. Oh, I can play an immortal high elf who commands the forest, or a fierce orc that can choke and slam a dragon? Nah, I'll just be Norm, the level 1 human fighter with 2 alive parents and a healthy relationship with their extended family. Humans are the template, the default, the control group. They're like the blank canvas the world expects you to project yourself onto. And you know what that means? They're an empty vessel on purpose, like the protagonist in a young author novel. Can't have too many specifics, otherwise they can't be a self-insert, right? Humans in fantasy games are always balanced around being able to do anything decently, like a +1 to everything. Get a bonus feat, a bonus skill. No race has ever offered less while still somehow being one of the most powerful picks at your disposal. They're like a reliable car with decent mileage, okay horsepower, and no personality. Sure, it gets you where you need to go, but no one's going to be impressed seeing you pull up as a human. They don't have dark vision, they don't have claws, they don't even live long enough to see the ancient evil they sealed away come back for revenge. But they do have a knack for picking things up and randomly become better at it than the elf or the dwarf that has honed their skills for centuries. We have all heard the tale of a human at the age of 50 who became the most powerful wizard in the land, surpassing everyone including the Council of Elders that created magic in the first place. But have you heard the tale of the same Council of Elders having to do the whole thing over again because that same human died in their 60s from some health complication, having only been an archmage for like a decade? Not much was done in the grand scheme of magic. How is it that the shortest lived, least naturally magical race always ends up running the continent? You've got elves who can naturally spellcast as toddlers, dwarves building cities in the harshest climates since they were kids, and dragons who can literally vaporize armies with a yawn and would be able to rule for thousands of years, but somehow some human named King Gregor V is sitting on the throne. It's always the same. The human kingdoms have united under one banner to defend the realm. So you're telling me a couple of elven tribes couldn't tolerate each other for just long enough to crush the human uprising? Yeah, I guess that checks out. They can't be bothered to do anything even when their lives depend on it. Let's be real, if there's a war that utilized spells that made the planet mostly uninhabitable, or a crusade against the literal gods that resulted in reality falling apart, odds are it started with humans. They colonize the elves, they mine the dwarves' sacred mountains, they experiment with forbidden magic. They even summon an evil deity that promises them immortality in exchange for their soul when they die, and they don't seem to realize a conflict of interest there. And yet, every time the world is ending because of a human, there is another human who is destined to save everyone. Only humanity has the courage to fix it. Buddy, you broke it. The least you can do is fix it. Have you ever read human lore in fantasy games? It's just Europe with dragons. Feudalism, noble houses, children of monarchies fighting for the throne, and a church that's definitely not the Catholic Church. And always some legendary human hero with a glowing sword that's way too big for them, and a name like Daedric Dawnbreaker, Lightbringer of Lord's Landing. Meanwhile, the elves are over here creating rune magic, and the dwarves just discovered steam-powered tanks. But no, let's focus on Norm and his sword, because for some reason, Norm's gonna win with 500 years less of combat experience. Humans get all the personalized drama. Orphan with mysterious powers, chosen one of a forgotten prophecy, street urchin turned thieves guild leader turned king, all human. The only race with upwards mobility in fantasy for some reason are humans. The peasant boy can marry the princess and become the most feared pirate captain in the land. But an elf that was born in the second most wealthy noble family will never be able to even consider speaking with the most powerful family. Other races will talk about the glory days of their ancestors and their homelands that they're eager to return to, while humans will just give you a whole sob story. My entire town fell to dark magic. I watched my family die 3 times. First, the necrotic magic of the Lich robbed them of their life essence. Second, when the Lich peeled back their skin and rose them as skeletons, that robbed them of their identity. And finally, third, when a band of adventurers came and a paladin smited them to smithereens, taking from us the ability to give them a proper burial. Like, calm down, Oscar, no need to be dramatic. You got the award, you have the most motivation to slay the Lich. Humans are the only race allowed to be anything. You want a human barbarian who eats rocks? Fine. A human necromancer raised by cultists? Cool. A human monk who does backflips and speaks 7 languages? That's a standard build. But try making a scholarly half-orc who teaches elven poetry. Now it's a bit unrealistic. Humans can do anything and still be normal. Everyone else has to justify their entire existence within the fantasy setting. Meanwhile, a human can simply say as a child they saw something that they thought was cool, and now they want to become the best person to ever do that thing, and it's just accepted. Humans live like, what, 70 years? If they are an adventurer or a random peasant in a small town, that average age gets a lot lower. Most other races don't even move out of their parents' basement until that age. But that doesn't stop humans from founding empires, changing history, building cities across the lands, having large civil conflicts due to overextension, and then seeing the civilization come to an end, all in one generation. And when the king dies, apparently he left a legacy. Ah yes, the bloodline of King Greg still echoes through the lands. He ruled for 2 years and only got the job because he betrayed his brother, who betrayed their father, all within the span of half a decade. Chill. It shouldn't count as an empire until at least the 500-year mark. Your grandkids will never have heard of that kingdom or the other 3 that have risen and fallen by the time they're old enough to walk. Humans in fantasy are just us with even less accountability. Same flaws, same ability for war crimes, now with the ability to do magic. If you thought humans were bold before, just imagine how aggressive they can be if any abuse of magic gets rewarded with more powerful magic. Humans commit fraud without magic. You don't think that a human wizard would just use conjuration to sell fraudulent goods and then run away before the spell duration ends? Hell, I don't make counterfeit bills in real life, but if I could conjure ones that seem legit and last 24 hours, I'd dine and dash in every tavern my party stops at just because I had the spell slots to burn. Ah, humans, the vanilla, adaptive, and drama-addicted disaster species of fantasy. They break things, crown themselves kings, and get overthrown by other humans that break their things. In a game where you can be anyone and you basically pick yourself in a tunic, you could argue that you're limiting your full potential within a fantasy world. But you could also argue that it's the best option because you don't have to be limited by the tropes of other more narrowly defined races. The fact that you can throw a human into any situation and they come out capable of thriving is a testament to their resilience. That's why I don't consider it an insult by any means when humans are called fantasy's most basic adventurers. What fantasy race exists purely because people are too indecisive to commit to a real backstory? The answer is Half-Elves. Half-Elves will never stop bringing up how they're stuck between two worlds. Just a tragic drifter moving across the continent who never really found a place in either elven or human civilization. Sure, it sounds tragic the first time it's brought up, but after hearing more of their sob story, you realize that most of their tragedy is self-inflicted. Every campaign is packed with half-dragons, half-orcs, and even half-demons. Are you telling me that you can't fit in somewhere better than a literal hellspawn? You're not stuck between two worlds, you're just bad at choosing one. There is no right answer about which culture is a better fit, and you just kind of have to commit to one. Playing your heritage like it's a love triangle isn't the deep philosophical flex that you think it is. Everyone has to decide where they want to make a life for themselves at some point. If you're not a complete loser, you'll eventually find an elven village or human city that is willing to tolerate you and your totally unique upbringing. Half-Elves are a combo of two races coming together. In theory, there are hundreds of possible ways to showcase this. For some reason though, every single iteration of a half-elf involves having pointy ears. Human ears are a recessive trait when it comes to fantasy genetics, I guess. Every half-elf woman is described as the most beautiful elf you've ever seen, but now with softer features. Their slightly less pointy ears and more rounded face somehow completely eliminates all the traits people associate with elves being cold and uncaring, which means you are now not only the prettiest girl in school, but also super approachable. The half-elf men are somehow even more generic, because they all seem to be just elves with patchy beards. Half-elves seem to have a lot going for them despite their tragic upbringing. Every half-elf downplays how much of a power pairing elven talent and human adaptability is to have. You already won the genetic lottery. Is it really the end of the world if you don't get to be king too? Just take advantage of your leg up in life and become the legendary adventurer you were destined to be. Whenever a half-elf keeps complaining about being denied their birthright, it feels like watching a spoiled trust fund kid who finally got cut off try to explain how they have it so bad. Do you know who I am? I'm Darian Nobleson, the estranged prince to the High King of the Elven Court. And yes, while it sucks that Darian wasn't allowed to rule because of his mixed heritage, I'm not exactly heartbroken. Half-elves always seem to have one cruel parent and one kind-hearted parent, and if one of them is dead, you just know it's going to be the nice one. I guess when your whole gimmick is that you're stuck between two worlds, it makes sense to have a little tension when it comes to the family dynamic, but why does it always seem to be so one-sided? If your elf side has always seen you as a disappointment, then doesn't that make it really easy to just run off to where your human parent is from? Yeah, you'll outlive your cousins and that kinda sucks, but someday you'll become the beloved town elder, and you can tell their great-grandkids all about how awesome they were. If no one from your elf side decides to visit during your 200-year lifespan, that is their loss. I know that elves can live a long time and can be stubborn, but if they don't visit you at least once a century, I think that still makes them a deadbeat. Half-elves don't always try to be the main character, but their lineage always seems to guarantee that they will be. Apparently, you can never just have a random elf innkeeper fall in love with the local human blacksmith. There always has to be some kind of geopolitical drama baked into the relationship, like a now exiled elven prince falling in love with the baron's daughter. Do they still love each other? Of course not, but at one point they risk the well-being of both kingdoms to be together. Guess who gets to clean up their parents' messy divorce? The half-elf, of course. Both of your parents' extended families are at each other's throats, and now for some reason it is up to you to mediate the fate of the world. That is why adventurers who grew up in an orphanage are actually the lucky ones. You still get to be the child of prophecy that brings peace to the realm, and you get to avoid all the headaches that come with the family reunions. Half-elves live longer than humans, but they don't live nearly as long as a lot of other races. It seems like half-elves are always indecisive about what to do with their lives, but they don't have the luxury to throw away a few hundred years to find themselves like their elven family did. If a half-elf wants to make a name for themselves, they still need to be hustling like their human counterparts. Whenever I hear a half-elf complain that elves don't take them seriously, I nod along to be nice, but they are objectively wrong. Why would an elven parent parent hand over anything to their half-elf kid. It doesn't really matter what I'm talking about, be it a kingdom or even just a small family business. Best case scenario is that the half-elf will be able to run things for a century, and then it goes right back to the parent. Seems like a waste of time for the elf. Half-elves are always eager to abandon everything, to go on the road in the hopes to find a newfound family. I get that growing up can be hard, especially when both sides of the family have high expectations for you, but half-elves tend to have the natural talent of their elf parent and the adaptability of their human parent, so those expectations are actually pretty attainable, and you might just be lazy. The truth is that half-elves probably just enjoy being with a bunch of outcasts in a party because it makes them feel like they fit in, but the reality is whenever the party goes into town, no one is going to care that there's a half-elf in the party when there's a 7-foot-tall lizard man barbarian right next to them. Tachamp's family was all slain when the king sent his army to purge the swamplands of Lizardfolk. He is actually trying to find a new place to call home. You just won't call your elf dad because he moved on after your mom died. So yeah, half-elves. They're caught between two worlds, but only because they expect the world from both sides of the family. Lucky for them, their situation is not nearly as bad as they think. They'll find their calling soon enough, and your party can be part of that journey, as long as you tolerate the occasional whining. When it comes to adventuring, they're a staple for a reason. You get all the talent of an elf, with about half of the entitlement. They'll learn to fit in eventually with the vibe of the group, so even if they start off a little over the top, they'll get better. Half-elves always find a way to excel in new situations, and we love them for that. You'll never find a more talented and less self-aware person, and after about 20 minutes, they'll consider you all the siblings they never had, mainly because they don't count all the half-brothers and half-sisters that they do have. Just make sure to never leave their side for too long, or they'll start thinking that they've lost their family all over again. Leave them alone for a week, and they'll already be with the new adventuring party, talking about how they were just barely scraping by until they found this new group. That is why half-elves are fantasy's most privileged outsiders. What fantasy race is the only one that has to specify what they meant by "you look good"? Because there's a 50-50 chance you're either about to be asked out to dinner or become dinner. The answer is obviously Lizardfolk. Look out, I think Tachamp likes you. Lizardfolk seem to have no real interest in money or knowledge, which makes keeping them motivated at the table seem at first very difficult. However, their love of food regularly makes them the easiest party member to pander to whenever you need to move the plot along. If you want the party to make their way to the bakery to meet up with their Thieves Guild contact, just let the aroma of a freshly baked meat pie lure your lizard brain buddy right to their windowsill. Your party will not be able to get the Lizardfolk's attention until after they've scarfed down that meat pie and the contents of the neighbor's trash bin, but at least you'll be in the right place. Most issues that a Lizardfolk causes will be centered around eating something or someone that the townsfolk didn't want them to consume, but they won't miss a bandit camp or two. I truly believe that the main reason a Lizardfolk joins a group of adventurers is because they regularly get access to fresh corpses that the party would rather not have discovered by the local town guard. It is important to remember that Lizardfolk aren't inherently evil, but they are perpetually hungry. After traveling a bit with the Lizardfolk, you'll realize that some of their traditions are not typical, the biggest one being how they handle death within their newfound family. While you may be trying to preserve the dwarf cleric's body for a funeral or a resurrection if you guys have the funds, a Lizardfolk is already asking the others which appendage they would like to feast on first. They aren't trying to be rude. This is how Lizardfolk make sure that a deceased member of the tribe can become part of the tribe again. That may seem a little literal, but honestly most Lizardfolk culture is like that. Lizardfolk don't even seem to have the patience to let their food make more food, as they just kind of live in the moment and spend their days hunting or scavenging for their next meal. Many other races pride themselves on growing specific crops and raising exotic livestock to make signature dishes, but the Lizardfolk by comparison just are content to eat whatever happens to come into their swamp that day. For most Lizardfolk, a simple life is a good life, so be patient with your Lizardfolk party members. It is likely their first time in civil society. Every time you read Lizardfolk lore, they are explained as living in not just any marsh, but instead the deep marshes. Or not just any wetlands, but the murky wetlands. It's almost like historians are trying to come up with new ways to describe the darkest and most damp environments possible, probably to help explain why Lizardfolk smell as awful as they do. Their homelands are never really a region of the world that gets a lot of tourists, which means they always end up having to travel somewhere more developed to seek employment as an adventurer. Because of this, I've always wondered how Lizardfolk handle adventuring to places with a lot less humidity. Do they like to roll around in every mud pile they see to cool off, and bring around a ton of lotion in their bags? I guess before they eat the recently defeated bandits, they can bathe in their blood, but how many bandit camps do you need to clear out to properly rehydrate their skin? The local mayor may be happy with the end result, but your party is going to be terrified of you by the end of the session. The entire worldview of Lizardfolk is built on a single binary system: food and bow. Food is anything that the Lizardfolk was able to eat without much resistance, such as small pets or the elderly innkeeper. The designation of bow is given to any individual that prevented a Lizardfolk from eating them on the first try. It is important to remember that everything is considered edible to a Lizardfolk, but they might enjoy your company enough that you're designated as emergency food. As much as it might seem like an insult to be considered a potential future meal, if a Lizardfolk tells you they'd eat you last, they are giving you a pretty big compliment. There will be long stints on the road where the party will have a hard time finding food, so when the hallucinations kick in and the entire party starts to look like some delicious chicken wings to the Lizardfolk, you'll be grateful that you were seen as the emergency food because the halfling that just joined the party last week wasn't so lucky. Every Dragonborn insists that they embody the best of what a medium-sized dragon race would be, but everyone knows that Lizardfolk are much closer to them in spirit. While Dragonborn are being prim and proper and pretending to be nobles, the Lizardfolk are out there striking fear in the hearts of adventurers and eating them whole. Sure, Lizardfolk don't really collect much treasure, but they do seem to collect a lot of bones during their feasting frenzies, which counts as hoarding in my book. While the swamps that most Lizardfolk call home aren't quite as grandiose as the caves that dragons reside within, at least they have some kind of dominion that they rule over. What do Dragonborn even really control as a group? Every Dragonborn that I've met seems to claim that at one point they had a lot of wealth, but now I'm always the one picking up the tab at the tavern. Lizardfolk win the debate of who's the most fearsome medium-sized humanoid, hands down. Lizardfolk culture is easy to understand if you think of any savage desert faction you've seen in various fantasy settings and replace all the sand with gallons of dirty brown water. Could you create a tribe that consists of more than just one really old shaman and thousands of hungry barbarians? Yes, but that would require someone actually creating more than a page of lore for the entirety of Lizardfolk kind. The best chance you're going to get on selling your party that Lizardfolk lore is actually interesting is by lifting lore straight from Elder Scrolls and hoping that no one played anything before Skyrim. Perhaps you can talk about how the other kingdoms fear the day that the Lizardfolk tribes fully unite and leave their homelands, as the Lizardfolk were the only territory in your setting that repelled a demon incursion from another realm. The Lizardfolk, after fending off the attack with no outside help, decided to invade into a literal hellscape to hunt down and consume those invaders because they got a taste for their flesh. A completely original idea that I'm just giving you for free. You can thank me later. Yes, Lizardfolks are the party's resident cannibal, but they aren't cannibals because they eat elves and humans. Those races are mammals, and it would be kinda weird if they didn't eat them. Just because everyone nowadays seems to speak common in your campaign setting, doesn't mean that Lizardfolk will suddenly feel bad about eating someone they've chatted with in the past. They consider eating their loved ones as part of the cycle of life, and would eat their own grandmother, so why do you think the party healer would be spared once they failed their death saves? Every once in a while, someone gets the bright idea to play a Lizardfolk that is a vegan, to be a little quirky, like a vampire who decided that they didn't want to consume blood anymore. Sorry to break it to you, Chomp, you're named that because you have only one purpose in life. It is to eat all these bodies that the party murdered before the town guard gets here. Get to chomping. So yeah, Lizardfolk. Next time you see one in your campaign and think they are heartless, remember that their brains just work a little differently than yours. These guys are truly one bad day of hunting away from turning you into their next meal, but it's not their fault that they're just chunky guys. They may be cold-blooded on the battlefield, but any lizardfolk can become a warm and welcoming member of the party if you train them right. I wouldn't recommend using a spray bottle to discipline them though, because they'll just misbehave on purpose, so you can keep moisturizing them. If you manage to keep one well fed, you'll have a loyal companion for life. Just make sure that they die before any member of the party, because I wasn't joking about the whole eat your ally to return them to the party thing. That is why lizardfolk are fantasy's most unapologetic cannibals. Which fantasy race is a bunch of green-skinned brutes that are usually every setting's default enemy. If you were like one of the thousands of adventurers whose tragic backstory involved your town burning to the ground by raiders, you likely said orcs. And you'd be correct. Let's be real, orcs were invented to get their teeth kicked in. They are fantasy's punching bags, the acceptable target of violence. No moral ambiguity, no complicated motivation, just big green dudes yelling, "Kill!" and then catching a fireball to the face. Killing orcs has always come in with built-in moral cover. You don't have to feel bad about it. Want to wipe out an entire town? Totally fine. And the excuses are always the same. They were raiding villages, so they had it coming. They serve the Dark Lord and are probably up to something evil. We need the XP and no one else will miss them. And honestly, in an age where people are obsessed with moral gray areas and no true villains, it is kind of refreshing sometimes to just roll dice and fight enemies who are cartoonishly, Skeletor level evil. They're not here to provide social commentary or moral debates. They're here to swing axes, burn villages, and get bodied by level 3 adventurers. What is orc culture in most fantasy settings? It's usually either a barbaric tribe ruling over a wasteland, or a military dictatorship with a protein addiction. They ride wolves into battle, worship war gods, and run an economy based on rocks and intimidation. And somehow every orc camp has exactly one blacksmith, 2 shamans, and an infinite respawn of grunts. Have you ever seen a peaceful orc village? Like one with a school or even just a general store? No, it's just huts, skulls, and a guy named Gorbash the Blind trying to beat the sun in a staring contest. And you'd think a society of bodybuilders permanently bulking would eventually run out of cows to steal and learn how to farm. But no, orcs treat every high fantasy setting like it's Fallout, scavenging a world they already ruined. I swear every time someone talks about the history of orcs and their setting, they begin with the line, "Orcs were once a proud warrior race." You've heard this tale countless times. They had honor, they had discipline, and they had epic sagas of conquest. But if that's true, then somewhere along the way, orcs dropped the ball harder than anyone in fantasy history. Now they're squatting in abandoned towers, arguing over who gets to eat the last goat, and setting tons of fires because they think it's a substitute for central heating. And the great downfall stories are always dumb too. Some settings say orcs drank demon blood, others say they got cursed for worshipping the wrong god. My favorite? They just got too violent. Yeah, those explanations just don't work for me. At least elves manage to retain some of their culture when their kingdom eventually comes to an end. Every great orcish kingdom in history is always just one bad decision away from ending up with them in a cave screaming about the good old days. Orcs are like a relative who swears he was this close to going pro, and now spends all his time sitting on the couch with his beer gut sticking out yelling at the TV. Sure, Crod, you were once a proud warrior, but that was a long time ago. Now you're just another angry orc that the local king told us to kill. Why does every orc speak like a YouTube comment from 2006?
Me no like this. Me angry. Me smash dislike button and your face.
It's like someone watched a single WWE trash talk promo and decided that's the entire language structure. Where are the eloquent orcs? The ones that can give TED Talks on tribal law and deliver Shakespearean monologues with blood still dripping on their axes. They don't exist because people keep treating orcs like they don't have a single deep thought rolling around in their head, and that they are basically an extension of their weapon. What would be a lot more interesting is if you had an orc that could read and write at above a kindergarten level. Although if they were actually able to express themselves at a high school reading level, that does open up an entirely new race for the edgelords to play. And I don't know if I'm ready to see an orc with wolf cut hair, fishnets, and a choker. Ugh, never mind. Funny how after years of slaughtering orcs, the second a player picks an orc, suddenly they expect to be treated by the world as a nuanced species with tragic backstories. Oh, I'm an outcast from both worlds, haunted by war and searching for peace. Okay, Zuko, let's maybe dial it down. We're here to make gold, not restore our honor. Every orc player character backstory involves a tragic exile and cruel parents. I swear, if you let a player run an orc, you're guaranteed a monologue about how they're not like the others, at least once per session. Orc player characters are 50% trauma dump, 50% lifting heavy things. Basically a gym bro in the weight room, trying to get over a girl that just dumped them by hitting a new personal best. They're usually the party's emotional baggage and frontline tank rolled into one, crying about their clan 1 second, and the next second raging and tearing through a goblin that tried to go through the party healer. Orcs are the go-to race for people who want to dump intelligence and roleplay as a weapon with anger issues. They can't read, but they know how to handle an axe. Just once, I want to see an orc wizard. Imagine a character named Gork Skullcrusher the Well-Read, charging into battle with robes that are too small for him, hurling fireballs that he learned from Wizard College. In a setting where sorcery is taught in schools, an orc wizard would probably be the only one graduating without 6 figures in debt. Because let's face it, every athletic department in the land is handing him a scholarship. Even if he had to cut back at the gym to study for his final, he's still benching more than any elf ranger or a human fighter. Why not let orcs be nerds? The guy who can crack your skull with the battle axe should also be able to crack out his spellbook, and when he is out of spells, he can just clobber you with his massive spellbook. Fun fact, earlier editions of Dungeons & Dragons actually described orcs as pig-faced. Yes, with full snouts, tusks and all. They weren't terrifying warriors, they looked like Porky Pig after a steroid cycle. And even though most modern fantasy dialed back the farm animal look, their tusks stuck around. Why? Tradition, I guess? Orcs get stuck with the fantasy equivalent of a bad haircut they can't grow out of. So here's the problem, tusks are now functionally and narratively useless. They don't help them eat, they don't help them talk, and they don't even make them scarier. Because when you're a 7-foot tall green rage monster dual-wielding axes, nobody cares about your dental accessories. Every setting draws them differently too. Sometimes they're tiny little things poking up like baby teeth. Sometimes they're massive curling boar tusks that look like they'd snag on any shirt they try to put on, as opposed to actually harming the opponent in battle. Where is the consistency? Orcs are really out here trying to terrify entire civilizations with what is basically cheap Halloween fangs. Nowadays, large tusks don't make you a fierce warlord. They make you look like you lost a fight with an orthodontist. If they really mattered, they do something, like being sharp enough to count as improvised weapons, but no. Every adaptation just shrugs and hopes you don't notice that orcs got stuck with fantasy's dumbest design feature. So yeah, orcs, the fantasy world's favorite punching bag. They're consistently big, loud, and angry, but no one really agrees exactly how that looks. They don't build empires, they just destroy yours. They don't solve problems, they usually end up creating even more annoying ones. And they don't get therapy for their anger issues because they get to become war chief when they're declared the angriest. But for all their tropes, stereotypes, and narrative whiplash, you can't have fantasy without orcs. They're the person who got you kicked out of the local tavern, the one who derails your diplomacy mission because the king looked at them funny, and the guy who insists on wrestling the boss monster instead of listening to the battle plan that you guys just spent the last hour coming up with. And you know what? We kinda love them for it. That's why they're fantasy's most overrated meatheads. What fantasy race started as reclusive nomads seeking new experiences and knowledge, but has now devolved into a bunch of furries that spend their days trolling the party by recreating cat memes they saw online? If you guessed Tabaxi, you'd be correct. Everyone knows that if you describe a fantasy race as a cat-like humanoid, any additional information on them immediately goes out the window. It doesn't matter that Tabaxi are described as taller than humans and are expert hunters. Now they are just big and lanky house cats that have zero survival instincts and no impulse control. Forget all the lore about their fierce berserker warriors and master tacticians who would be perfect to recruit to the party to track down dangerous bounties. Instead, you get to recruit Mabel the Meownchin, the shopkeeper turned concerned, reluctant adventurer who spends half of every encounter grooming themselves or hiding while letting out high-pitched shrieks, and then expects to get the same share of that shiny loot. And when the time comes to make camp for the night, the Tabaxi player can't be trusted to watch over the camp as the rest of the party sleeps. You just know that 5 minutes into their assigned shift, the Tabaxi will wander off to explore the surrounding area and immediately get distracted by the first thing the Dungeon Master mentions. If by some miracle the sleeping party doesn't have all their possessions stolen by bandits after the Tabaxi leaves their post, the Tabaxi themselves will come back and steal a few pieces of gear that catches their interest. Every time that someone asks the Tabaxi why they've decided to become an adventurer, the answer is always the same. They have an innate curiosity and a sense of wanderlust. But this isn't an online dating profile. Your interests can't just be I love to travel, and that you're always open to new experiences. That might explain why you left your hometown, but how exactly did you end up in a party of adventurers? You are supposed to be playing a Tabaxi, which are normally reclusive, so there has to be a concrete reason why you decide to stop traveling solo and join a group of murder hobos that are out for blood and glory. Did you get tired of scavenging for your own meals and just showed up at their camp one day and the party adopted you like a stray? I guess the cat distribution system must apply to Tabaxi adventurers too, because they seem to keep ending up in my campaigns without explanation. No matter how much session prep you do, there is always going to be a route that a Tabaxi takes that completely derails your game plan. Much like cat-proofing your own home, a Tabaxi will find a route using carelessness and raw agility that you did not think was possible out of a player character. They'll run past the party, climb up the roof, and squeeze into a window that you clearly described as leading to the evil king's throne room. And after they somehow pass all those checks, while being asked, "Are you sure you want to do that?" at every step of the way, a Tabaxi will find themselves face to face with the entirety of the royal guard with no ally in sight and just kind of stare blankly at you as if you, the dungeon master, are the one expected to bail them out of their own mess. I feel like a lot of Tabaxi forget that just because they can sneak themselves into somewhere with ease, that doesn't mean that they should do it. A Tabaxi doesn't have 9 lives. They have the same amount of death saving throws as anyone else. So if you're playing a Tabaxi and often find yourself making the party scramble to save you from your own actions, maybe it's time to at least hear the party's game plan before you run off again to chase a bird or whatever random thing got you stuck last time. The more I learn about Tabaxi lore, the less I think Tabaxi players have read it. Let's be honest, the real reason you picked one is because you're trying to be a furry with plausible deniability. No one really can disprove your claims that you only picked this race because it is busted as a rogue. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that you just start saying "nya" ironically. I don't think you're just memeing about it anymore. Just admit you're playing a catboy. I'm fine with you being a furry at the game table. I just want you to know that Tabaxi aren't normally played like hyperactive cat folk that constantly are trying to draw attention to their more anthropomorphic features. If your Tabaxi constantly hisses at the other party members and tries to use cute cat eyes to seduce every maiden that comes your way, then you were probably considered a bit of a delinquent in your clan, and you were likely banished from it sometime before this random group of adventurers adopted you. Apparently the Tabaxi are supposed to be pretty reserved when it comes to engaging in conflict, which is a stark contrast to most of these feral felines that I've met in my adventures. All the Tabaxi players that I know are very extroverted, and would have no problem getting to someone's face even if the conflict was totally avoidable. By comparison, the Tabaxi clans are known to be successful hunters because they only interact with their enemies during an ambush after it is already too late for them to escape. Sure, they have a fair share of berserkers in their ranks, but you don't become aware of their presence until after they start tearing you apart. Tabaxis have avoided all those annoying interactions that come with diplomacy by striking fast with the goal of complete extermination. Another plus that comes with this strategy is, since Tabaxis like being antisocial, not taking prisoners means that you don't have to deal with the tedious process of maintaining a prison while trying to be a nomadic people. The reluctance of the Tabaxi to interact with the world spills over to trade too. I know Khajiit are known as big traders, and that can regularly bleed into other fantasy catfolk tropes, but apparently a Tabaxi sees it as demeaning, almost like it's an admission that they were unable to acquire what they needed during their own scavenging efforts. Sure, the Tabaxi player is going to be a kleptomaniac trying to snag all the free goodies they can when around town and during dungeon delves, but if there's a shop that is well guarded and theft is impossible, are you honestly going to tell me that a Tabaxi wouldn't fork over all their gold for a magic item that they wanted? Your party's Tabaxi might be prideful, but a chance to upgrade to some +2 daggers will make them throw away that pride fast. If you find yourself in the company of a Tabaxi for an extended period of time, that means that you are likely dealing with one that the rest of the clan doesn't want anymore. They may be the runt that was unable to keep up with the others, or they might just be so insufferable that the clan was tired of their happy purrs giving away their position during ambushes. Either way, this is a Tabaxi that the rest of the clan doesn't see any value in anymore. Luckily for you, no matter how much property damage this Tabaxi racks up in their short stint with the party, there is one way you can pay down some of that bounty. Their pelt is usually considered quite valuable. So if a Tabaxi is becoming more trouble than they're worth as a teammate, that is always an option. I'm not going to give you any advice on how to skin them, but I will let you know that the going rate for the pelt is about 50 gold, and the ability to finally get some peace and quiet is priceless. So yeah, the Tabaxi, the fast, the furious, and the often feral. They're reliably unreliable, so make sure to use them when you need chaos instead of an actual plan. I mean, who else is going to disappear mid-heist just when you need that back entrance unlocked? But even with all their faults, I find them endearing. Someone has to keep things interesting, right? That is why Tabaxi are fantasy's most shameless furries. What fantasy race is angsty, horny, and reads like a Tumblr fanfiction? If you guessed the trolls from Homestuck, you'd be correct, but I was actually going for Tieflings. Tieflings are always presented as one of the most desirable races, but I feel like I'm missing something. I know people always talk about their stunning crimson skin, piercing eyes, and honestly a bit too much about their tail, but I don't see the appeal of a scaly goat person that makes intense eye contact and exclusively shops at Hot Topic. Tieflings are the poster child of my trauma is my personality, and Dungeons & Dragons answer to every moody teenager who wanted their OC to be both cursed and hot at the same time. So why does everyone want to date them, yet no one wants to be associated with them? Well, to be perfectly honest, the honeymoon phase goes pretty quickly when you actually spend a few months on the road with them. Adventuring with the Tiefling means you're stuck babysitting someone who refuses to turn off their edginess. They'll spend the entire tavern downtime writing in their journal about the bad things they had to overcome, instead of helping the party plan, and then act shocked when the group doesn't trust their totally reasonable deal with an infernal entity. You don't get a teammate, you get someone with unresolved generational trauma that claims they have to kill every now and again to make the powerful voice in their head go away. Not exactly what I'd call a reliable ally. If you frequently get kicked out of any town you've spent more than a week in, it might be a you problem and not an everyone else problem. Every Tiefling sounds like a vaguely threatening perfume brand, like Larissa Nocturne, Shadow's Bane. And as much as I want to know what a perfume with hints of brooding and brimstone smells like, I can understand why the average person would not want to hang around with someone crazy enough to wear black leather in the desert while monologuing about their dark patron. Especially when every time you try to actually get to know them when adventuring together, they'll stare into a campfire and say something ominous like, "Do you ever feel like you were born wrong?" No, Larissa, not everyone is a literal perversion of the natural order. Some of us had loving parents who just bought a home and wanted a few kids. Not many people were consummated in order to fulfill an ancient prophecy with a dark, otherworldly being to usher in 1,000 years of darkness. It doesn't matter what class a tiefling says they're playing, they always roleplay it like a warlock. Sure, they might claim to be a flirty bard, or a brooding arcane trickster rogue, or even a timid cleric of peace, but it's always a reflavoring of getting magical powers from a mysterious benefactor that the tiefling won't shut up about because it's actually their deadbeat dad. And if they're actually a warlock, even worse, because now we have to hear about your mom's worst one-night stand and the interdimensional scam artist you signed a lifelong contract with because you didn't read the terms of service and they reminded you of your father that was never around. Tieflings always assure you that one day they'll confront their patron and renounce their dark pact, but for some reason they still expect to be able to use all the cool spells this bond gave them. I don't think that they want to be free from their cursed bloodline enough to actually give up on their spell slots, and they more or less just want people to stop assuming they're as bad as their upbringing indicates, even though now as an adventurer they still choose to kill people for money and power, but that's totally a different situation because if they had a kid back home, they would love them unconditionally. Or at least that's what they'll claim as they take another job to assassinate a noble and leave 4 more kids without a stable father figure. It's only fair to these innocent children that they have to grow up like you did as a kid, right? All tieflings come with a mandatory, tragic backstory. It's in the fine print that they'll proceed to not read fully, sign their soul away to, and then complain about it constantly afterwards. In order to really maximize the emotional damage they're bringing to the table, the backstory has to have one or more of the following origins. They have to be abandoned by their village, raised in secret, hunted by inquisitors, found love, lost it, and then vowed vengeance. Or if they had a good life, accidentally killing their only nice caretaker in a fire before the age of 6. They're not the ideal adventurer, but they don't have a very large social circle, so adventuring is kind of their only option. They'll be able to bounce back from just about anything the villains of your campaign throw their way because they've already had it worse. And every time you ask about what could have possibly happened in your backstory that is worse than the bad guy who is starting the literal apocalypse, they'll say, "I don't want to talk about it." But don't worry, they'll talk about it anyway. No other race does narcissism quite like the half-demon with daddy issues that manages to tie every traumatic moment others experience in the campaign back to their own dark roots. And remember, even though half their backstory talks about all the bad things they've done to survive, they're not evil, they're just misunderstood. Tieflings love being misunderstood. Oh, everyone assumes I'm evil because of how I look and act and am. They live for the theatrics of it. They'll brood in the corner and wait for someone to say, "You're not like the other demons, are you?" They're basically allergic to normal behavior. Every choice has to be the edgiest possible one. Oh, is the caretaker of the local orphanage cruel? Guess we have to burn down the orphanage. Well, technically it was for the greater good. Yeah, no. There were tons of ways that you could have handled the situation. You picked the only one that left a dozen kids without a caretaker, suddenly homeless, and with third-degree burns. They are the edgelords who say it's not what it looks like, as a trail of dead bodies and questionable decisions follow wherever they go. They'll give a whole tortured monologue about their true heart, right before stabbing to death an NPC who mildly inconvenienced them. Then they'll swear they'll do better next time, and somehow their better involves more violence and less accountability. Remember, tieflings aren't evil, they just accidentally pick the most evil option every single time, and then cry when the consequences show up. Poor things. Ask a tiefling their alignment, and they'll say, "I don't believe in labels," but it will say chaotic neutral when you check their character sheet. Alright, cool, now tell me why you stabbed the mayor and stole his dog, and don't say that it's complicated when in reality you just thought the mayor was annoying and the dog was cute. Even though the alignment chart has been used less and less as time has gone on, tieflings avoid labels just because they want to be as impulsive and destructive as possible without someone saying their character is being inconsistent. And when tieflings aren't on the run for being lol so random, they try to claim that they are above the alignments because in reality they are doing what must be done, even if humanity won't accept me. Okay, Sephiroth, let's relax. We get that you have a little bit of magic blood in you, but in a world where people can study real hard and learn how to manipulate magic without a single drop of magic blood in their body, you aren't necessarily destined for greatness. In reality, you just had a little bit of magical talent because of your heritage, and you squandered most of your prime going from town to town trying to get laid and make some quick coin. Your character wasn't being complicated this whole time. The word you're looking for is annoying. Your character has been a menace to society since they were born, and there's nothing complicated about that. Tieflings know that their antics get them and others into trouble, so they have to throw in acts of kindness on occasion to help the party justify keeping around the literal hellspawn that serves a Dark Lord. You could absolutely argue that this is the Tiefling manipulating the party to put up with all their bad deeds, but mattering on the adventuring party that they found themselves in, there is a chance that there are some people that are much worse than them. In some ways, Tieflings have an easy out saying it's in their nature. Since no one really expects Tieflings to be good people, when one appears to have at least some compassion, that goes a very long way. The bar is really set that low with Tieflings. Every good deed is really one step forward and 3 steps back when you take into account all the impulsive decisions that they will make later on in the session. So yeah, Tieflings, fantasy's horniest and edgiest race. They're part infernal, part human, and all drama. They're the main character in their own novel, and the rest of the group has to just accept that they're now the side characters. And all that melodrama, all that magic, and all that angst makes for a pretty unforgettable character, because nobody steals a scene like a Tiefling. Nobody out-edges the villain like a Tiefling, and nobody, I mean nobody, broods quite like a Tiefling. That is why Tieflings are fantasy's most insufferable theater kids. What fantasy race has the ability to become literally anyone, but still somehow never manages to fit in for long? The answer is changelings. Every fantasy book says that changelings are masters of disguise, but every changeling that I've met seems to not realize that a good disguise blends in with the situation required, instead of simply being the most grandiose persona you can come up with. If you want to be a master of distraction, that's fine, but that just means that you're good at being loud and flashy in various cosplays. A successful changeling has to be able to collect intel ahead of time and practice a few voices to really sell their new persona. Sure, the town guard may let you enter the Baron's Keep as a random noble because your disguise is convincing and your paperwork is in order. But if you leave moments later disguised as the Baron carrying everything valuable from his keep, trust me, they know what the Baron yelling at them sounds like, so you're gonna have to be accurate. Changelings seem to think that they can't have any core personality traits because they swap everything about themselves at a moment's notice. Sometimes it's played for sympathy, such as, I've never truly figured out who I am or what's my purpose. But the truth is probably that they are just afraid of direct confrontation. That's like when you get asked, what kind of music do you listen to? And you respond with, I listen to a little bit of everything. Have a little confidence, buddy. Just because a changeling can have vastly different personas doesn't mean that you can't find your own voice first. If you want to make it in the changeling disguise biz, you need to find your niche, own it, and then eventually slowly move out to other types of personas. A changeling that has decided that their whole gimmick is just that they use disguise self to always fit in is not really much of a character at all. The party wants a teammate, not a yapping wand of a first level spell. Whenever a changeling is at the table, the Dungeon Master is guaranteed to constantly be on edge. When a new NPC is introduced, there's a chance that the changeling will instantly want to copy their appearance. If there's a new faction that you mention offhand, they'll quickly craft the perfect persona to join as a new recruit. When you have a race that is perfectly adaptable and able to enhance charisma-based character builds, it almost feels like there's 2 Dungeon Masters at the table throwing new NPCs at each other. The rest of the party better be good at taking notes, because there will be a lot of names thrown around. Have you ever had a changeling that wants to disguise themselves as the king, walk up to the king, and then pants them? That is only a fraction of the chaos that a motivated changeling player can inflict upon a campaign. We're all lucky that changelings tend not to hang out in packs, because it would only take like a dozen of them working together to completely collapse your local empire's entire chain of command. Hold on, I gotta write down something for my campaign. You ever wonder what a changeling village would look like? Yeah, we all do. While elves will hide their societies with magic and trees, and dwarves will dig halfway into a mountain so you don't knock on their front door, changelings stay hidden by never being where you last left them. You'll never find a changeling city because every changeling has relocated 3 times and legally changed their name twice this month alone. And if you do find one, it's actually just one guy running an entire city with their various personas. Changeling society is basically just a loose loosely tied network of people who will lie about each other's resumes to help them get a job. We both know that it's probably your buddy from college saying that you were director of operations at your last gig, but we can't prove you guys are lying yet. Changeling names are interesting because they tend to be only 1 or 2 syllables at most. If you've ever tried to reserve a username for an online game that has been out for a while, you know just how hard it is to get a unique name with so few characters. That means you'll find a whole lot of changelings slapping X's, Y's, and Z's in their name to try and come up with something that is still available. Instead of doing that, I found that the most effective way to name a changeling is to imagine what sound they might make while frightened, and then treat them like some kind of perpetually startled Pokemon. I'd like to introduce you guys to your new party member, Mim, the Meek. He decided to become a rogue because when you're the one being stealthy, it means people are less likely to sneak up on you. Somehow, Mim still manages to get jump scared at least once a session, but at least the noise they make sounds cute. If you want to give your party some trust issues, kill one of their favorite NPCs and then reveal that the corpse transformed into a changeling. After a long awkward silence, you'll likely see the whole party draw their weapons. Even if the changeling wasn't up to anything sinister, and just like being a good friend to the party in this new persona, the party will start questioning everything. They will start accusing each other of secretly being a changeling, and if the party has been playing together for a while, I can almost guarantee that someone will be exactly that. I love when someone decides to play a changeling that is hiding that fact from the party, because they always act like it's the first time anyone has thought of it. Usually the player character will show up as another exotic race like a Tiefling or a Tabaxi and start immediately hinting that they have a secret. I get that you're super excited about your character concept, but I can guarantee you that the rest of the party is just wondering how long they have to make their characters play stupid about the fact that your character is obviously leaving every 10 minutes to actually make use of your other personas. Hey Zill, I'm parched. Can I get an ale and let you handle this last section for me?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes a changeling doesn't just pretend to be someone for a short period of time to help the party achieve their quest. On occasion, they get tired of wandering aimlessly with a bunch of brain-dead adventurers and see a person living their best life with a successful business. You see how that small town treats a simple tavern keep with so much love and acceptance and can't help but to feel a bit envious. One day you notice that he isn't feeling well and closes shop early to go to bed, and you just kind of copy his appearance and finish his shift. Everyone is happy to see that you're suddenly feeling better, and you spend all night chatting with the local townsfolk. Just some harmless roleplay as the party does whatever it is they do during downtime. Then you think to yourself that maybe if the tavern keep stayed sick a few more times, that you could keep up this little facade for a day or two more. A little food poisoning never hurts anyone too badly, and the party can probably manage just fine without you for a few days, right? Suddenly weeks go by, and you're telling your party from behind the bar that you haven't seen a changeling stroll into town since they first arrived. You make sure to tell them about a strange abandoned crypt on the other side of town, and you say you heard a rumor that a lot of people go missing when they try to visit it at night. Anything to get them to leave and not look around the place for more clues about where you might have gone. I mean, at this point, you might as well be a doppelganger, and if the party were to do some digging, they might go in the cellar, and it would break the town's heart to find out what happened to the real tavern. Hey, Lou, what the hell is this script?
Oh, I just thought it'd be fun for you to read about a changeling that likes playing pretend. You like playing pretend, right, Zill?
Get the hell out of my tavern.
Your tavern?
So yeah, changelings, because underneath the personas is just someone looking to be accepted. Sure, the constant lying and occasional identity theft probably ends up hurting more often than it helps, but what's the point of being a shapeshifter if you aren't constantly flexing that ability? It's like asking an Aarakocra to not fly because using it in every situation might piss off your DM, or choosing to not remind your DM that you have dark vision every time you enter a dungeon so you don't piss them off. You and I both know that every time a racial feature can be spammed, it will be spammed. I'd like to think that when times get tough for the adventuring party, a changeling will decide that this is the first time they won't skip town. They can always re-roll their name and face, but the party that they've come to trust will get left behind too, which is something that they've been searching for all these years. Sure, the changeling might flee the initial mess that they caused, but they'll end up returning later disguised as one of the guards coming to arrest the party. That way, later that night when things die down, they can slip you guys a key to unlock the jail cell door. Would it have been better to just not cause a mess? Probably, but then you wouldn't have gotten to try out 2 or 3 fun new personalities. You have to remember that changelings aren't actually consistently good at social encounters. They just have the ability to mulligan a bunch of first impressions until they get a favorable outcome. That is why changelings are fantasy's most socially awkward cosplayers.
If you liked the video, make sure to check out my other releases on the channel and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, you can get 10% off when you use code LukeGoblin at gamersupps.gg. Be sure to try out their AFK sleep supplements. My favorite is Banana Berry Bedtime. It's perfect for any changelings who are having a hard time going to bed, knowing they have their friend locked up in the cellar. You can get a ton of delicious flavors with or without melatonin, so there's something for everyone, even you, Zill. Anything you want. Use the link in the description below, and if you can, please get me out of here. See you next time, if there is a next time.